Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry was born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, a small town in the United States. As the youngest of 10 children, her parents faced great challenges in providing for their large family. In difficult circumstances, Crystal and her siblings grew up quite independently, with her parents being too busy to look after all the children. Fortunately, Crystal's older sister, who was only 12 years old when Crystal was born, took on the role of mother and looked after her younger brothers and sisters. Growing up in such a difficult environment, they all wanted to start their own lives as soon as possible, so her siblings lived in different cities and states. Crystal also dreamed of starting a family. While in high school, she met Tom and they eventually got married. Initially, they moved to California, but Crystal soon realized that city life was not for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine and settled in Bridgeton, a small town about an hour away from Crystal's hometown. The quaint town is famous for being the setting of Stephen King's novel, The Mist. Crystal worked at a local shoe store, while Tom held various part-time jobs. Later, Crystal found out she was pregnant and they welcomed their daughter, Sarah. Although Tom initially wanted to be a father, his relationship with Crystal became complicated after their daughter was born. He began spending more and more time at a local bar, wasting almost all of their money on alcohol. At one point, he even took all of Crystal's savings to buy groceries, leaving them without food. The financial burden of Tom's drinking problem became too much for their relationship, and Crystal eventually decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom still visited his daughter occasionally, but he was not actively involved in her life. The situation became worse when Tom started dating someone new and his girlfriend began harassing Crystal, constantly calling and threatening her, visiting her house and causing chaos in public, all because she could not accept Crystal's previous marriage to Tom. Crystal was hesitant about Sarah visiting her father because she was worried that his new girlfriend could endanger Sarah's safety. After her parents' divorce, Crystal moved in with her mother. She spent years saving money, and finally, she was able to buy her own house. The house was located in the suburb of Bridgeton, near a peaceful lake and a forest. Crystal and Sarah were delighted to finally have a place they could call their own. Crystal grew up in a large family, so when she had her own daughter, she gave her as much time, attention, and love as she could. After a long day at work, Crystal and her daughter, Sarah, would often rent a movie or just talk for hours. One evening, on May 10, 1994, when Crystal was 30 and Sarah was 12, they watched the solar eclipse together. The next day went as usual. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. That evening, they had dinner and Crystal put Sarah to bed. A few hours later, Sarah woke to the sound of her mother screaming. At first, she thought Crystal was on the phone, arguing with someone. However, she quickly realized the situation was much more serious. Crystal's screams were loud and frantic, making Sarah think someone was attacking her mother. With the bedroom door ajar, Sarah mustered up the courage to approach, despite her mounting fear. She moved closer to the door, and as she listened, she realized the scream was coming from the kitchen. However, from where she stood, Sarah couldn't see what was happening. Sarah was terrified, not daring to move or make a sound, afraid of revealing her location. Then she heard footsteps, and her heart sank as she assumed that her mother's attacker was now coming for her. In a desperate attempt to escape, she hid behind the bed and waited anxiously for the door to open. However, instead of the door, she heard the sound of a kitchen drawer sliding open, followed by the sound of someone rummaging through utensils. Her mother's continuous screams and desperate pleas for forgiveness filled the house, and in the next few seconds, Sarah heard what sounded like someone had started stabbing her mother with a knife. With each brutal stab, Her mother's cries grew fainter and fainter until they strangely stopped. Gathering her courage, Sarah finally left the room and went to the kitchen. What she saw was a horrifying sight. The only light came from the moon shining through the window, as the kitchen lights were off. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. When she entered the kitchen, she saw her mother lying on the floor in a large pool of blood that covered the entire floor. Despite her shock, Sarah knew she had to call for help immediately. Next to her mother's hand was a phone. Sarah quickly picked up the phone and dialed 911, but she only received complete silence on the other end of the line. She then ran to Crystal's room to try the second phone. But unfortunately, it didn't work either. Despite trying several times and getting the same result, Sarah realized that she had only one option left: to seek help from the neighbors. Braving the cold of the May night in only her pajamas and bare feet, Sarah ran out of the house and into the street. Her main concern was to find someone to help her injured mother. She started running to the nearest house, about half a mile away, towards the center of the city. However, when she knocked repeatedly, no one answered. Undeterred, Sarah continued to run to other nearby houses, knocking on each door, but still no one answered. Finally, after several attempts at many houses, Sarah arrived at a local Italian restaurant, whose owner lived in the adjacent building. She knocked desperately and finally got an answer. The owner, shocked by Sarah's panicked state, let her in and listened as she explained the urgency of the situation. Her mother had been attacked and she desperately needed help. Sarah then called 911 herself and reported what had happened. The police immediately arrived at their home. When they examined the front door glass, they discovered a fingerprint, which they quickly identified as Sarah's. A thorough search of the crime scene found no other fingerprints. However, the kitchen floor revealed several bloody shoe prints. Police took photographs to determine the size and style of the shoes, suspecting they belonged to the killer. The shoe prints led to Sarah's bedroom but mysteriously stopped at the entrance, as if the killer had returned without entering the room. Police noticed two unusual details at the crime scene. It was clear that the killer had tried to wipe some of the blood off the floor. However, it was clear that the killer could not remove all of the blood, as there was blood everywhere. However, there were also other drops that fell to the floor at right angles, and judging by the splatters from a greater height, the police speculated that the killer had injured himself during the murder, and that the blood was theirs. This theory was reinforced by the discovery of a trail of blood leading to a roll of tissue paper, but there were no remaining rolls nearby. It is possible that the killer used the tissue paper to stop the bleeding after being injured during the murder, and then immediately left the crime scene. Medical experts discovered more than 50 stab wounds on Crystal's body, indicating that this was a violent and intentional attack. The murder weapon, later determined to be a kitchen knife, was not found at the scene, suggesting that the killer had taken it with them when they left. During this process, a piece of the knife broke off and was embedded in Crystal's body, further highlighting the force used. Additional testing revealed that Crystal had been sexually assaulted, allowing experts to collect DNA and blood samples from the perpetrator. Despite this crucial evidence, the investigation was plagued by unexpected delays. Due to a lack of funding, the local lab was overwhelmed, so it would take at least 6 months to get the results. This forced the police to begin their investigation without any concrete evidence. Initially, the police ruled out a robbery, as nothing appeared to have been missing from the house. They also noted that there were no signs of forced entry, leading them to conclude that the perpetrator was likely someone Crystal knew, as she likely opened the door for them. Since she was wearing pajamas at the time of the incident, it is unlikely that she was waiting for guests, leading police to speculate about a potential relationship between Crystal and her attacker. The police have two main theories about the case. Crystal knew the killer and let them in willingly, or the killer was a stranger who knocked on the door and tricked Crystal into opening the door. To gather more information, the police decide to start by questioning the only witness, Sarah. At the hospital, where Sarah is being checked, the police ask her why she ran to a neighbor's house for help instead of calling 911 from her own home. Sarah explains that she couldn't use her phone because it wasn't working, but the investigation finds this explanation suspicious, as both Sarah's and Crystal's phones were working properly when checked by the police at the crime scene. Police believe Sarah may have become confused due to the stress of the situation. Initially, they considered the possibility that the first phone was inoperable, as the first caller had turned off her phone and needed to reset it to make another call. As for the second phone, they did not rule out the possibility that Sarah may have dialed the wrong number in her haste or that the phone line may have been temporarily disconnected due to the rain. As the investigation continued, the police asked Sarah if she had seen the killer. Sarah replied that she had been in her bedroom during the incident. However, the police were a little skeptical of her story and asked how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife. Sarah's explanation was that it was obvious. But the police continued to press her. They felt that she might be withholding some information and that she had actually seen the killer. In the 3 days after the murder, the police interviewed Sarah 18 times. They hoped her story would change, but she stuck to her original account of events. Then the police found their first important clue. A local shoe store had a pair of boots with soles that matched the bloody footprints found at the scene. They also discovered that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, the girlfriend of her ex-husband Tom. Although the killer was clearly a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa because she had repeatedly threatened to kill Crystal. Teresa may have had someone help her commit the crime, but the police did not find any evidence to support this idea. During their investigation, they discovered that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years before Dennis started working at the shoe store where Crystal worked. They began dating soon after and eventually became engaged, although they never married. The police found that their relationship was strained, with frequent arguments between the couple and Dennis sometimes engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking things and punching walls. However, the police did not find any evidence that he had ever harmed Crystal. The day after the murder, the police came to Dennis's house. When he opened the door, they asked him if he had left the night before or if he had seen Crystal. Dennis immediately responded by asking if Crystal was dead, and he passed out shortly after. After regaining consciousness, Dennis began answering the police's questions. He explained that he had originally planned to visit Crystal that evening, but he had been late for work because he had helped a friend fix his car. When he finally returned home, he called Crystal, but she told him it was too late to visit. This led to an argument and Dennis stayed home. Although the police could not be 100% sure that he was telling the truth, they were able to verify that he had helped his friend fix his car that evening. Dennis also voluntarily took a lie detector test, which the police found no signs of lying. Although the police noticed that he had the same shoe size as the killer, they did not find any matching shoes in Dennis's home. He agreed to provide a DNA sample, but he asked the police to do him a favor, saying that if they decided to arrest him, they should enter his workplace through the back door to avoid disturbing others. He explained that his boss had always treated him well and he did not want to disrupt work. During the investigation, the police contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town. This friend shared a disturbing conversation she had had with Crystal just a few weeks earlier. In the story, Crystal expressed fear for Dennis. Their arguments escalated and Dennis became increasingly aggressive. Crystal considered ending the relationship but hesitated for fear of Dennis's reaction. The police then went to Crystal's workplace to further question her co-workers, but were unable to gather any useful information. As soon as the police left Crystal's workplace, Dennis entered and began asking what the co-workers had told the police. Despite the police's efforts, no evidence was found to implicate Dennis. and had to wait months for the DNA results, so they continued to search for other potential leads. This led them to a local man named Donnie, who had gotten drunk at a party and started bragging about killing Crystal. During the investigation, police brought Donnie in for questioning. However, the man claimed that he had no memory of attending a party and denied any involvement in the murder. Police later discovered that Donnie was an alcoholic and a notorious liar. In another development, a witness reported seeing a black pickup truck with New Hampshire plates near Crystal's neighborhood, but this lead ultimately went unanswered. Another witness came forward describing an incident in which she drove past Crystal's house on the night of the murder. She recalled hearing sirens, assuming they were related to her boyfriend, who lived down the street and was a frequent troublemaker. At the same time, she saw a car with headlights following her at high speed. Thinking that the driver was chasing her, she turned onto another street. However, the car passed her. Police have not been able to confirm whether the car was related to Crystal's murder. The investigation is still ongoing, and they have had difficulty finding any concrete evidence. In an effort to get the case back on track, Crystal's family has offered a $10,000 reward for any information and has posted flyers around town to attract potential witnesses. However, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, Teresa, has been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers. Crystal's ex-husband, Tom, was investigated thoroughly, but police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. He was an alcoholic and had become worse over the years, leaving him almost drunk. In this state, it seemed impossible for him to commit such a crime, and he had no apparent motive. The police investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but found no connection between them and the crime. All the men, including Tom, provided DNA samples. The police waited for the test results, which took 9 months. When they did, they showed that the blood and semen samples did not match any of the suspects, including Dennis. With no new leads, the police requested a DNA sample from Dennis again for further testing, but the results remained the same. With no progress, they decided to re-interview their only witness, Sarah. They still believed that she was lying to them, or that her mind had blocked out the horrific memories of her mother's murder and that she had actually seen the killer. To investigate further, they traveled to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt, and took a polygraph test. The results showed no deception on Sarah's part. However, the police continued to interrogate her over and over again, asking the same questions. But she repeatedly insisted that she had not seen the killer. Ultimately, the case remained unsolved for years, with police continuing to interview witnesses and potential suspects, but without any significant breakthroughs. In the late 1990s, the FBI DNA database became available, allowing police to upload a DNA sample of Crystal's killer. However, no match was found. A new police officer took over the case in 1999, determined to review all the available evidence and collect more DNA samples from men in the town and surrounding areas. Advances in laboratory technology allowed for faster testing, and hundreds of samples were collected. Unfortunately, none of these samples matched the killer's DNA. The police also asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to explore the possibility of recovering repressed memories of the crime. Sarah agreed, but the psychologist concluded that her claim of not seeing the perpetrator was true and that she had not actually repressed any memories. Years passed, and despite the police's continued efforts, the case remained unsolved due to a lack of new leads. The case took a surprising turn in 2006 when police received news of a DNA match. A DNA sample entered into an FBI database matched blood and semen found at Crystal's crime scene. The DNA belonged to Michael Hutchinson, a man who had never been investigated or suspected in the case. Further investigation revealed that in 2003, Michael had been arrested and convicted of assault with a weapon, resulting in a 6-month prison sentence followed by 3 years of probation, during which time his DNA was collected. A DNA sample from Michael was initially collected but not uploaded to the FBI database and remained on file at the lab. Years later, Michael was arrested for driving drunk with a child in the car. After being released on bail, he failed to appear in court and was subsequently sent to jail. On the day of his wedding, Michael was arrested and taken into custody. A new DNA sample was taken from him, and this time, it was uploaded to the database immediately. Soon after, the police on Crystal's case received a match. They informed Sarah of the development but asked her to keep it a secret until formal charges were filed. The police also asked Sarah if she knew the suspect, and she said no. With Michael in custody, the police began to slowly build their case to ensure that the suspect had no chance of escaping punishment. They discovered that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's home. Michael was 19 and lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. Since Michael frequently visited his mother's house, just a short distance from Crystal's home, the police suspected that Michael may have seen Crystal on several occasions. The police visited Michael in prison and asked him about the murder, but Michael denied any involvement and claimed that he did not know Crystal. However, the police were skeptical of Michael's story, as his DNA was found on Crystal's body and his blood was found at the crime scene. While in custody, the police made an interesting observation about Michael. He had a large scar on the palm of his hand, which appeared to match the wound that Crystal's killer may have suffered during the murder. Although the scar alone was not enough to prove Michael guilty in court, the presence of his DNA firmly linked him to the crime. He was later charged with murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Michael, a user of illegal drugs, had frequently passed by Crystal's house, and that on the fateful night he decided to attack her. But he refused to plead guilty, so it is impossible to know how it all happened. But with the evidence available, the outcome was clear: Michael attacked and killed Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was also sought for the killer not leaving any fingerprints at the crime scene, as Michael worked as a bricklayer. Over time, people who do this work often have worn and torn patterns on their palms, making it impossible for them to leave fingerprints on the surface. In his testimony, Michael stated that he met Crystal at a bar and they went back to her place, where they had consensual sex. A man in a black motorcycle jacket broke into the house, attacked Michael, and killed Crystal. Michael regained consciousness and tried to fight off the attacker, but he was injured in the hand and the attacker escaped. However, Michael then left the crime scene without a valid reason, which raised doubts about his story. There were several inconsistencies, including the fact that the only shoe prints at the scene were Michael's, suggesting that if his testimony was true, the intruder would have had to remove his shoes before entering, which is highly unlikely. Additionally, there were no other signs of a break-in or struggle at the scene. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with a guilty verdict for Michael. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael remains incarcerated to this day. The traumatic event of her mother's murder had a profound impact on Sarah. However, over time, she found the strength to rebuild her life. Sarah pursued further education, pursued a writing career, and eventually published a book chronicling her mother's murder, compiling all the available information. Furthermore, while writing the book, Sarah discovered new facts about the case that the police had overlooked. She discovered that Michael often borrowed his father's car, a black Ford pickup with New Hampshire license plates. This information was important because a witness had previously reported seeing a similar car near Crystal's house on the night of the murder. Another witness also reported seeing a car with its high beams speeding past her house that night. She initially thought the police were headed for her boyfriend's house because she mistook the sirens of an ambulance for police sirens. The woman's boyfriend was revealed to be Michael. The police had recorded his name and address in the report. However, they did not investigate him further at that time. Had the police investigated him further, They might have discovered the cut on his hand, potentially solving the case sooner. Unfortunately, past events cannot be changed. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a family of 4 siblings, and they lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise of the city. In the summer of 1975, when Christy was 14, she enjoyed spending time with her friends and sisters. They enjoyed going swimming at a nearby community, especially on hot days. Occasionally, Christy also babysat for families she knew. On August 22nd, a friend of Christy's asked her to babysit her child until late in the evening. The next day, Christy woke up around noon, and it was an extremely hot day, with temperatures reaching 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So Christy decided that a swim would be a great way to relax and cool off. She brought her younger sister, Kim, to the community with her. Kim jumped right into the water while Christy chose to relax on a lounge chair. A while later, her friend came to chat, and after a short conversation, the two left together. Kim was surprised when her sister, Christy, left her alone without saying a word. Instead of following her, Kim chose to stay at the pool. Later, when she returned home, her sister had not returned. After several hours without any sign of Christy, Kim began to worry. She decided to search the neighborhood for her sister and soon met a neighbor. The neighbor informed her that about an hour ago, the police had discovered the body of a little girl a few miles away, but they had not yet identified her. Kim rushed home to inform her parents of the situation. They quickly contacted the police, saying that their daughter was missing. The police advised them to go to the morgue, where they would show them the body of the dead girl. Initially, her parents had difficulty recognizing the girl because of the severe bruising on her face. However, the mother later discovered a birthmark on the girl's leg and recognized it as Christy. After identifying the girl, the police informed the shocked family of what had happened. At around 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report that he had found a human body in the woods behind the shopping center. He and his wife and son had gone there to buy toys for their children. Before entering the shopping center, the son asked to walk along a popular trail in the woods behind the building. This trail leads to a nearby river, which attracts casual walkers. After agreeing to let the boy walk, the parents allowed him to follow this path into the woods. When the family returned, they noticed a suspicious scene a short distance from the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man lying on the ground, bending over someone and hitting them with a piece of wood. When the man discovered the family, he immediately got up and ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a girl lying on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was studying medicine, tried to check for a pulse but could not find one. The father quickly ran to a nearby shopping mall and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided police with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young man, about 20 years old, tall and slim, with shoulder-length black hair. He was wearing jean shorts and boots at the time of the incident. Using this information, police created a sketch of the suspect and turned it over to patrol officers. The crime scene examination did not turn up any significant clues. Although police discovered a piece of wood that was used as the murder weapon, they were unable to find any evidence that could identify the perpetrator. Notable details from the crime scene included that Christy's hands were tied with telephone cords and that her clothing was in disarray, as her bikini top was pulled down and her t-shirt and shoes were found nearby. However, forensic analysis did not reveal any evidence of sexual assault. Police therefore theorized that the perpetrator may have intended to attack Christy, but something frightened him and he ran away. Christy's sister reported to police that she had left the pool with a friend named Carol. So they went to speak with Carol. Carol reported that she had received a suspicious phone call that day from an unidentified man claiming to be a local radio DJ. He told her about a cheerleading competition that was supposed to take place in their town, with the winners receiving free tickets to the state fair. The caller invited her to meet at the entrance to a forest trail behind the mall, where someone would provide more information about the event, which was supposed to start at 1:45 p.m. Carol's account of the events aroused the suspicions of the police. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister. However, on the way, they encounter Christy and her sister. After a brief conversation, Carol invites Christy to come with her instead, and they decide to leave their sisters behind and head to the mall. When they reach the entrance to the woods, the girls sit on a fence and wait for someone to arrive. When no one appears after a while, Carol says she left Christy for a while to go to the mall and asks for the time. She returns a few minutes later, only to find Christy gone. Still waiting for a while longer, Christy does not reappear, prompting Carol to finally leave. The police investigation finds no evidence of cheerleading competitions in town as the anonymous caller had reported. This leads them to two possible explanations. The caller could be the killer trying to lure Carol into the woods, or it could be a prank unrelated to the murder. Unfortunately, the call cannot be traced, making it impossible to identify the caller. Further investigation uncovered inconsistencies in Carol's story. According to Carol, she had met Christy and her sister on the street while walking to the mall. However, Christy's sister, Kim, disputed this claim, saying that she and Christy were at the pool and that Carol had joined them there. But that was not all. Later that evening, Christy's mother met Carol, who lived just a few dozen meters from their home, and they had a rather strange conversation. Carol apologized and said that things had gone too far. She said that she was supposed to be the target and that there were two people involved in the murder. However, when Christy's mother tried to get more information, Carol ended the conversation and left. The mother reported this to the police, who questioned Carol again. But Carol denied making these statements, maintaining that her original story was true. She later took a lie detector test, but showed no signs of deception when asked questions critical to Christy's case. As a result, the police took her off the suspect list and focused on finding other leads. The city was thrown into a state of widespread fear as news of the brutal murder spread in the days that followed. This fear was compounded by a disturbing realization: the police suspected the killer was a local resident, as they seemed to have a good understanding of the area behind the shopping center. Spurred on by this new information, the police launched a massive investigation, using every available resource. Their efforts were finally rewarded 3 days after Christy's murder, when a significant breakthrough was made in the case. At approximately 5 p.m., a Columbus Police Patrol officer spotted a man who closely resembled the composite sketch of Christy's killer. The patrol officer quickly notified the case officers, who arrived at the scene and asked the man to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, 25-year-old Jack Carmen, agreed to cooperate. However, the police faced a problem. Jack had a significant intellectual disability, with an IQ estimated at around 50, according to various tests. Because of his condition, Jack required specialized medical care and lived in an apartment provided by a nonprofit organization. He had difficulty with basic skills, including reading, writing, and speaking. Despite these challenges, the police on the Christy case could not ignore the striking resemblance between him and the composite sketch. Jack's interrogation was difficult and exhausting. Most of the time, he responded with short answers or remained silent. The police began to question whether Jack fully understood the meaning behind their questions. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. Eventually, the police began to make some progress by asking the simplest and most specific questions possible. Using this approach, they were able to extract a confession from Jack. Jack stated that on the day of the incident, he began by leaving his apartment and taking a bus to the mall. His intention was to buy clothes, specifically pants and shirts. When he arrived at the mall, he walked across the parking lot toward the entrance and saw Christy sitting on a fence near a trail leading into the woods. Jack approached Christy, grabbed her, held her arms, and dragged her into the woods, where he assaulted her. After the assault, Christy attempted to flee. Jack caught up with her, picked up a nearby log, and repeatedly hit her on the head. He then fled the scene, running to the main road in front of the shopping center, where he boarded another bus. The next day, the police took Jack to the woods, where he identified the exact location of the crime scene. Jack also shared specific details with the police, such as the log breaking in half when it hit Christy, which only the perpetrator would know. The police assembled a lineup that included Jack and asked the couple who found Christy to identify the person they saw at the scene on the day of the crime. Both identified Jack. Jack was then formally charged with assault and murder. Although forensic experts found no evidence to confirm his testimony, Jack still confessed to committing sexual assault during the crime. Therefore, the prosecution decided not to dismiss the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty. However, Jack and his attorney opted for a plea bargain. Jack admitted his guilt to the judge, and as a result, he was sentenced to life in prison, avoiding the death penalty. The trial was quick, possibly due to the public interest in the case, with thousands of people following the proceedings. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack Carman was officially sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, public perception of Jack's guilt began to change. As more information about his confession and personal life emerged in the media, many began to question whether he was truly capable of committing such a crime. Those close to Jack never suspected his involvement in the crime, describing him as a non-aggressive and timid person who often lied when forced to lie. And an incident at a charity center where he took the blame for a broken boiler, even though someone else had done it. Jack's ability to honestly confess to the crime has also been questioned. Although he had significant difficulty speaking, police claimed that Jack provided a detailed description of the crime. However, those who knew Jack's suspect at the police guided him by asking leading questions that included relevant facts from the case. This means that if they asked, "Did you hit the victim with a piece of wood?" and Jack answered, "Yes," it could be misinterpreted as a confession. A woman involved in Jack's treatment revealed that when pressed, Jack would confess to anything. If he was threatened with the electric chair, he would likely comply with whatever the police asked him to do. Those who support Jack's innocence have also found that the police brought him to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, the couple who later identified him at the police station. They had seen Jack and knew he was the suspect. However, the police maintained that the couple had never met Jack, a claim that many found hard to believe. Several other events raised serious doubts about Jack's involvement in the case. Police were unable to find the bus driver or any passengers who could confirm that Jack was on the bus he claimed to have taken home, as stated in his confession. Furthermore, several people at the charity building where Jack lived and worked gave testimony. They reported seeing Jack at 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, it is unlikely that he would have taken the bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of town and committed the murder at 1:50 p.m. He would have had to have taken the bus to the outskirts of town, which would have taken at least 40 minutes. Even if he had left immediately after being seen, the timestamps do not match. This led many to question Jack's guilt and believe that the police pressured him into a false confession. Even Christy's parents began to suspect that Jack was not the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, about 70 people gathered in front of the town hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. A public committee was formed to fight for justice. This led to Jack finding new representation, as his new lawyer quickly filed a petition for a review of the case. A few months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to prove his guilt almost from scratch, which seemed like an almost impossible task. Christ's father, Norman Mills, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway, dissatisfied with the police's efforts to find his daughter's killer. Not wanting to rely solely on the police, he took it upon himself to seek answers. Shortly after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the woods, where they discovered a pair of bloody jean shorts and men's underwear. They turned these items over to the police, who initially ignored them during their investigation. However, it remains unknown whether these items were connected to the case or were even tested. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense team had two main goals: to prove Jack's innocence and to identify the real killer. They suspected Henry Newell, the 25-year-old man who had discovered Christ's body along with his wife, as a suspect. When the trial began, Jack's lawyers compiled a long list of reasons to suspect Henry of the murder, and the list continued to grow throughout the trial. Henry initially gained attention for his extensive criminal record. As a teenager, Henry had been in trouble with the law several times, leading to 3 prison terms. Notably, he escaped from prison twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, Henry was serving his 4th prison sentence for arson in order to collect insurance money. Furthermore, when lawyers reviewed the evidence from Christ's case, they discovered several suspicious details. In his testimony, Henry claimed to have discovered the body, approached it, and tossed aside a piece of bloody wood. Although he explained that he was in shock at the time, this action still raised many questions. It is unclear why Henry would have picked up the murder weapon and moved it away from the body without any logical reason. He also claimed that he thought the girl was still alive and tried to save her by taking off his shirt and holding it to her face. This action was also suspicious, as it was unclear whether Henry was actually trying to stop the bleeding or if his shirt had become stained with blood during the killing, causing him to create an alibi for the stains. Jack's lawyer found a store employee at the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said that he was not wearing a shirt but jean shorts. However, when the police arrived, Henry had changed into a different pair of pants. The employee also reported that Henry had a new, obvious bruise on his face, indicating that he had been beaten by someone. When asked why this detail was not disclosed to the police immediately, the employee said that no one asked her specifically about it. The police themselves should have noticed this bruise, but they ignored it at the time. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but ended up vomiting into the machine, rendering the test uncompleted. The police did not conduct any further tests. Henry's neighbor was another key witness. He reported seeing fresh scratches on Henry's hands as they spoke on the night of the murder. The neighbor also claimed to have seen a telephone cord in Henry's garage that matched the cord used to tie the victim's hands. Furthermore, the neighbor shared a disturbing story that Henry had told him. Henry claimed that he knew Carol, Christ's 14-year-old friend, and that they had swum naked in the pool together when Henry was 25. This revelation shocked everyone involved in the case, as it revealed a disturbing relationship between Henry and Carol. While there was no concrete evidence to support this claim, it did suggest that Henry knew Carol, who was directly involved in the case. His wife Pam also testified in court. She said that everything happened exactly as they told the police on the first day. She explained that the family had gone to the mall and their son had wanted to go for a walk, which led them to the woods where they discovered the body. From that point on, Henry remained at home, only leaving briefly to chase away neighborhood kids who were throwing fireworks into their yard. Henry was brought from jail to testify in court, where he stuck to his original story and maintained his innocence in the case. One of the most important moments of the trial was the playing of the entire audio recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching the recording, it became clear that Jack had been pressured by the police to confess to the murder. Jack barely spoke and seemed to have no idea what the police wanted from him. However, a more dramatic development occurred on the fifth day of the trial when a surprise witness appeared, a testimony that neither the prosecution nor Jack's attorneys had anticipated. The surprise witness was Henry's stepson, Bobby, and his statements would shock those following the case. The boy explained what had really happened that day. Henry had left the house to scare away some kids who were throwing firecrackers in their yard, but Henry had not only been out for a few minutes as his mother had said. Henry had been gone for more than half an hour. When Henry returned, he had lost his shirt and slippers and had scratches on his face and arms. Henry then spoke privately with Pam before telling Bobby that they were all going to the mall. However, instead of going shopping, Henry and Pam took Bobby to a nearby trail where he had not asked to go for a walk. In the woods, they found one of Henry's torn slippers, and a little further, they came across Christ's body. Henry's mother told Bobby to keep what he had seen a secret. Years later, after talking to his biological father, Bobby decided it was time to reveal the truth. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted a strange incident involving Henry that occurred at Christ's funeral. On the way back, she said that it was a tragedy, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep quiet." In addition, a friend of Henry's testified that he had confessed to killing Christ. According to this friend, Henry claimed that the act was unintentional, not intentional. In the end, this trial left little doubt that Jack was not involved in the crime, and all charges against him were eventually dropped. But this is where things get interesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing the case against him. The prosecutor criticized the police for ignoring many clues and evidence that were available from the beginning of the investigation. This criticism was met with widespread public outrage. As a result, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the case 2 days later. However, there was still a major problem. The new investigation relied heavily on the initial findings, including the statements of Henry and Pam. As a result, the police continued to operate under the initial assumption that Christie's body had been discovered in the woods with a long-haired shirtless man nearby. They focused on finding new suspects who fit this description, similar to Jack. Unsurprisingly, this approach yielded no results. Despite months of continued efforts, the case eventually stalled. Christie's father pursued justice relentlessly. He even filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, not because he thought Jack was guilty, but to gain access to the case files. By doing so, he hoped to gather more information about the case. Unfortunately, this effort was ultimately unsuccessful. Christie's father died of cancer in 2006, still without the answers he was looking for. For years, the investigation into Christie's murder went dormant, until 2013 when former attorney John Allard decided to reopen the case. John took the investigation into his own hands and contacted everyone involved, looking for new leads. Christie's family gave him a box full of her father's files, compiled over the years until his death. After reviewing the documents and speaking to dozens of people, John became convinced that the killer was none other than Henry. During the investigation, John discovered that Christie's friend Carol smoked marijuana and found evidence that she had purchased marijuana from Henry. This connection led John to suspect that Carol may have fabricated the story about meeting a DJ in the woods, and that she may have planned to meet Henry to buy marijuana instead. It is possible that Carol invited Christie along, using the DJ story as a convincing excuse. Alternatively, a darker scenario emerged, in which Carol may have acted on Henry's behalf, luring Christie into the woods to attack her. And Henry had scratches and bruises on his body, suggesting that Christie had fought back before she died. As John continued to investigate the case, he discovered that Henry had committed many other crimes, including arson, domestic violence, and assault. Another notable incident involved the death of Henry's wife, Pam, in 1982. Despite filing for divorce, Pam was still living with Henry when she was found dead in their apartment. The official cause of death was an overdose of sleeping pills. However, Pam's family members were skeptical and suggested that Henry may have altered the pills. What was even more unusual was that, although Pam had clearly consumed a large amount of sleeping pills, no packaging for the pills was found in the apartment, as she would have been unable to dispose of them after taking such a large amount. In 2013, Henry died of cancer at the age of 63, but John persisted in his quest for justice for Christy. He published a book compiling all the available information about the case, which sparked public interest. Christy's family, along with others, have called for the investigation to be reopened. Notably, some of Henry's relatives contacted John, confessing that their entire family knew Henry was the one who killed Christy but kept quiet. A family member of Henry's recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry gave her a car as a gift and they went for a drive together. At one point, he asked her to stop the car, turned to her and confessed to killing Christy, describing the crime in detail. The woman did not believe him, thinking he had made up the story because he had been drinking heavily. However, after reading a book about the case, the woman's memory of that conversation returned and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. This revelation eventually led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. The police thoroughly reinvestigated the case for several months, re-interviewing many witnesses and re-evaluating potential leads. A significant breakthrough came from Henry's confession to a family member, in which he claimed to have assaulted Christy. Initially, medical experts found no evidence to support this claim. However, using modern technology, police re-examined Christy's clothing and discovered small, previously undetected semen stains. Unfortunately, these stains were too small to extract enough DNA for analysis. The investigation dragged on until late 2015, when police held a press conference to announce their findings. 40 years after the murder, they finally announced that Henry was the one who committed the crime. However, since he was no longer alive, they were unable to take the case to court. As a result, the case was officially declared solved. Although some details of the crime remain unclear due to the lack of a confession, police felt confident that they understood the general circumstances surrounding the murder. It is possible that Henry went to the trail behind the shopping center after leaving his home. Carol may have asked him to meet her there to buy marijuana, but this has not been confirmed. When he arrived, he encountered Christy, who was alone, and decided to attack her. He tied her hands with telephone cords and took her deeper into the woods. Christy defended herself, scratching Henry and hitting him in the face. Henry may have then wrestled her to the ground and killed her with a nearby log. After the attack, Henry returned home and told his wife what had happened. Together, they devised a plan that would allow him to avoid being held accountable for his actions. Carol's involvement in the case remains unclear, and it's possible she will speak out one day. A recent press conference revealed that the police mishandled the case years ago, with the current police apologizing to the Christie family for the negligence of their predecessors. The initial evidence was enough to charge Henry with murder. But it appears the original police chose to ignore it. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Donald Alban Blom. Donald Alban Blom was born in Minnesota on February 5, 1949. He was an American. Donald's early life was difficult, as he experienced frequent physical and emotional abuse from his father starting at a young age, which continued until his teenage years. At that time, Donald was drinking a lot of alcohol and showing signs of behavioral disorders. His behavioral issues escalated as he entered puberty. His actions also became more erratic. For example, he frequently skipped classes during his time at reform school in 10th grade. On May 26, 1999, a night shift clerk, Katie Poirier, was working alone at a convenience store located within a service station. After midnight, a customer called the police to report that the clerk had disappeared. Upon their arrival, police officers found the store to be empty. A review of the store's surveillance video revealed a large man leading Katie out by her neck around 11:11 and 40 seconds p.m. He was wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 on the back. Katie appeared to have been forced out of the store. Police questioned Catherine Hannock, an employee at the nearby Subway restaurant, in connection with the incident. She reported seeing a man behaving suspiciously shortly before the Subway closed around 10 p.m. After closing, she drove home and coincidentally encountered the same man driving away from the area. Catherine described the man's vehicle as a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab and white markings on the side. She observed the truck circling the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. Notably, Katie's car was still in the parking lot when Catherine left work. A composite sketch of the kidnapper was created based on that customer description and partial surveillance footage. The sketch depicted a man with long blonde hair, approximately 25 years old. This image was then broadcast on local television and published in newspapers, along with a plea for information from the public. As investigators gathered clues, hundreds of volunteers from around the state converged on the wooded area surrounding the station to search for Katie Poirier. Despite the use of service dogs and helicopters, no signs of her were found. Posters of the missing girl flooded local newspapers and billboards, making it a highly publicized case. Meanwhile, authorities checked in the nearby sex offender facility. Upon verifying that all inmates were present at the time of the incident, police focused on tracking down the suspect's vehicle using its license plate number. They found the owner of that car, which belonged to Donald Blum, but unfortunately, his truck was a different color than the one they were looking for. On June 6, 1999, the official search for Katie was terminated without success. However, many volunteers did not give up hope and continued looking. They believe there will be someone with information that will help the investigation. The fact that the abduction occurred in a store with a security camera led investigators to question whether the perpetrator was foolishly reckless or remarkably bold in carrying out their actions. Although the case remains unsolved, searchers continue to hold out hope that the perpetrator will eventually make another mistake that will lead to their capture. The search team narrowed their investigation to the neighborhood, as the perpetrator seemed to be familiar with the area. Given the possibility that the perpetrator visited the store multiple times before the crime, it's likely that someone in the neighborhood had seen him previously. A search headquarters was established at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, where staff members processed leads and volunteers distributed flyers with Katie's description. Maps on the wall highlighted areas already searched, marked with large crosses. Despite these extensive efforts, Katie remained missing. A new theory emerged, suggesting that the kidnapper might be a sports enthusiast, possibly a fan of the New York Yankees. And the police enlisted the help of a sports figure to aid in the search. Unfortunately, after 2 weeks, there were still no developments. The Police Minnesota enlisted the help of Paul Molitor, Minnesota Twins legend, to create a public service announcement. The announcement reached a wide audience across the state, including Daryl Brown, an employee at the Minnesota Veterans Home. Daryl recognized a coworker, Donald Hutchinson, who matched the suspect's description and had recently been acting suspiciously. Donald Hutchinson had stopped driving his black pickup truck, had been absent from work the day after the abduction, and had recently gotten a haircut. As investigators looked into Donald Hutchinson, they discovered that his real name was Donald Blum. Further investigation revealed that he owned a black pickup truck hidden in his garage. as well as owned a plot of land near the location where Katie was last seen in Moose Lake. It was also discovered that he had a history of sex crimes, including the kidnapping of young girls, similar to Katie. With this information, detectives quickly obtained a search warrant. Detectives then tracked down Donald, finding him with his family at a campground 140 miles from Richfield. Early one morning, law enforcement agents arrived at Donald's residence to ask him questions. Following a thorough inspection, it was discovered that Donald had purchased a plot of land in Moose Lake about 2 years prior. His neighbors confirmed that he had visited the property frequently before Katie's disappearance, but not then. Donald's supervisor at the veteran home where he worked stated that he was unaware of Donald's past convictions because Donald used a different name, Donald Hutchinson, at work. The supervisor added that Donald kept to himself and didn't socialize much. After his arrest, Donald Blom was initially cooperative and friendly. But he later refused to testify and requested a lawyer. During this time, authorities conducted several searches. Although numerous items were seized from Donald's residence, but officials refused to disclose what they were or how they related to the investigation. A second search was carried out on Donald's 20-acre property in Moose Lake, with over 100 National Guard members and several hundred volunteers participating. The search party trekked several miles into the woods surrounding Donald's property, but were forced to stop as night fell. The search resumed the next morning, and Katie's mother expressed her optimism that her daughter would be found alive. While some held on to the hope that Katie was being held against her will, the sheriff was less hopeful. On the second day of the search, investigators have found an important clue. Bone fragments were found in the ashes of a fire pit on Donald's property. They sent the remains to a lab for further analysis. The lab results shocked everyone. The remains were identified as bone fragments. A tooth found in the ashes was sent to dental specialists for examination. Certified forensic dentist, Dr. Norlander conducted a thorough examination of the tooth. However, she knew that any DNA in the tooth's pulp would have been destroyed due to the conditions under which it was extracted. As a result, she had to use alternative methods. During her examination, Dr. Norlander discovered something that resembled a dental filling. This finding confirmed that the tooth was human and allowed her to investigate whether it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings consist of two components, an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. When exposed to heat, the organic matrix burns away, leaving behind particles of the inorganic filler. The analyst can identify a specific brand or group of brands based on the type of filling used. Manufacturers use various types of fillers, up to 50 different kinds, which are easily visible on dental X-rays. A comparison was made between the filling found in the tooth from Donald's fire pit and those used for Katie, revealing a matching composition. Furthermore, researchers determined that it was a specific tooth, number 18, belonging to a young woman. Given the similarities, it was highly likely that the tooth belonged to Katie, rather than someone else. A crucial question still needs to be addressed. Why was the perpetrator released from prison despite having kidnapped 7 girls? A more effective justice system may have prevented Katie's tragic fate. Instead, the perpetrator, Donald, changed his name and assumed a new identity, hiding his dark past and continuing to cause harm. In Katie Poirier's case, Donald was charged with kidnapping and illegal possession of a weapon, a federal offense. Initially, he rejected a plea agreement, but later changed his mind and agreed to testify under the condition that he be allowed to call home. On September 8, Donald made a 2.5-hour confession. According to his testimony, on May 26, 1999, he went fishing and returned home to Richfield. However, he later drove back to his Moose Lake home, stopping to buy liquor and have a beer at a bar along the way. It was there that he saw Katie, grabbed her, and forced her into his pickup truck without knowing her. Donald then drove Katie to his motor home. He explained that he didn't fully understand his motivations for the actions he took, but stated that he strangled Katie from behind, which lasted approximately 20 minutes. He denied committing any other assault. After confirming she was dead, he positioned her body in a fetal position in a fire pit and used wood and paper in an attempt to burn the remains. However, his testimony conflicted with the video camera footage and evidence found in the burn pit. Specifically, Donald claimed Katie repeatedly asked him to release her, but she didn't struggle until he began choking her. He asserted that he used only his bare hands to kill her. Furthermore, his claim of using wood and paper to burn the remains to ashes was considered unfeasible. Wood and paper alone could not have reached a high enough temperature to turn a human body to ashes. When questioned further, Blom acknowledged that his actions didn't make sense, and he was unable to provide a clear motive for his actions. After the interview, Donald contacted 2 local television stations to inform them of his actions and request that they leave his family in peace. The plea deal also included the return of several properties to his wife Amy Blom, including a plot of land, their home in Richfield, and the family vehicle. However, the news of Donald's confession was extremely distressing for the Katie family, who had held on to the hope that she was still alive. Donald asserts that he killed and cremated Katie on impulse, without any clear motive. But soon, Donald retracted his testimony, saying that his initial confession was false and induced by the pressures of solitary confinement and medication he was taking at the time. According to Donald, the isolation and medication caused him to hallucinate, leading him to believe that confessing would be the only way out of his situation. Donald then stated that he didn't know what he was saying. As a result, the initial plea deal was cancelled, and lawyers for both sides began preparing for the trial. Donald Blom's trial began in June 2000 and jury selection took 5 weeks to complete. The trial then lasted for another 5 weeks, with over 50 witnesses, including several key ones, testifying. Carlton County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Thomas Perler opened the case. Among the early witnesses was Donald's own brother, who revealed that he had given their family a box of used clothes, including a New York Yankees jersey. This contradicted Donald's previous statement that he had never owned such a shirt. 2 women who were kidnapped by Donald in 1983 also testified, describing his behavior towards them. The jury gained further insight into Donald's motives when they realized that 2 young girls that he kidnapped bore a resemblance to Katie. Furthermore, forensic experts analyzed a partial tooth found at the scene and confirmed that it matched Katie's age, gender, and dental records. Dr. Ann Norlander initially questioned whether the object was a tooth, but after conducting further tests, she testified in court with a reasonable degree of medical certainty that the tooth belonged to Katie's. Her conclusion was largely based on the discovery of specific chemicals in the filling material. Additional evidence against Donald included a surveillance video from another store, taken in May, which showed him with blonde tips in the time of the kidnapping. This detail was confirmed by his barber and made him appear younger. The most crucial piece of evidence emerged when Donald confessed and the judge permitted Donald's statement to be considered as part of the case. As this evidence was presented, the courtroom fell silent, except for the quiet sobbing of Katie's relatives. It seemed clear that the evidence against Donald was mounting. Rodney Broden, the lead defense attorney, began calling witnesses on August 7th. The first witness he called was Amy Blom. Amy testified that her husband was at home on the night Katie disappeared. Amy remembered this detail because she was concerned that her husband's criminal record might make him a suspect. Later, she recalled the specifics of Donald's whereabouts that night. He had returned home around 9:30 p.m. and they had already gone to bed. When she woke up the next morning, she found that he had already made coffee, further confirming that he was at home. Amy further testified that she was treated poorly by the police during their questioning. She alleged that they threatened to take her children away from her if she did not answer their questions as they wanted. Amy described their behavior as bullying and stated they called she a liar. During the trial, Amy testified that she had never seen Donald's brother give Donald a baseball jersey, and he had never worn one, as far as she knew. Meanwhile, Donald was visibly emotional, crying and wiping away tears. When Donald took the stand to defend himself, he denied kidnapping Katie Poirier under oath. However, he had previously admitted to the crime during the investigation. During his testimony, which lasted over 3 hours, Donald exhibited emotional turmoil, frequently speaking and crying. He claimed that his life was unraveling and that he felt unwell around the time of the crime. Donald also mentioned that his wife, Amy, was considering leaving him due to the media attention. This led Donald to try a new tactic. In an attempt to gain the jury's sympathy and ultimately secure his release from jail, he portrayed himself as the victim. Although he initially confessed to the crime, he later took back his statement. Donald changed his story, claiming that he was at home with his wife, who had previously testified to the same, on the night of the crime, despite having gone fishing at Moose Lake earlier. He arrived home before 10 p.m. well before the time Katie was taken. During cross-examination, Donald was forced to confront the inconsistencies in his initial statements to the police. His appearance in court ultimately did not help his case. Donald came across to many as someone who complained excessively and was trying to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. After the questioning concluded, Donald Blom appeared frustrated. He turned to the judge, uttered a profanity, and requested permission to make a single statement, but was denied. Then, the case went to the jury, who deliberated for 10 hours, 3 of which spent reviewing the taped confessions. Ultimately, they returned a guilty verdict, and Donald Blom was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Donald Blom maintained that his case was not hopeless and was confident that he would eventually be cleared of the charges. He strongly denied any involvement in the crime, insisting that he had not killed anyone. Despite his conviction, he believed he had a solid foundation for an appeal, but the appeals court ultimately upheld his conviction in a lengthy 81-page ruling issued in 2004. Although his trial was imperfect, the judges concluded that it had been fundamentally fair, and therefore saw no justification for overturning the conviction or ordering a new trial. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Neil Entwistle. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978 in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England. His parents, Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle, raised him and his younger brother Russell in a small house. His father, Clifford, worked as a coal miner before becoming a labor consultant, and his mother, Yvonne, worked as a cook in the school canteen. After finishing high school, Neil attended York University to study electrical engineering and business management. While at the university, he met Rachel Souza, an American student studying abroad. From Kingston, Massachusetts. Rachel attended Silver Lake Regional High School and later transferred to Holy Cross College in Worcester. During her year at York University, she joined the rowing team, where she met Neil. Described as reserved and unsociable, Neil impressed his friends with his calm demeanor. Rachel, on the other hand, was outgoing, and her American background added to her charm. As a result, she was popular while on the rowing team. Neil and Rachel spent more time together, and they became closer. Neil and Rachel found themselves attracted to each other. Neil worked at a defense and security technology company in Malvern, Worcestershire. Meanwhile, Rachel pursued a career in education. After completing her studies in 2002, she became an English drama and theater teacher at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch. Neil shared a post on Friends Reunited in June 2003, joking that his job was making bombs and other things for a living. He also expressed his happiness about his upcoming wedding to Rachel, whom he called the most wonderful woman in the world. They met through sailing and formed a deep bond. Although he said he felt a little unhappy living south of the border in Birmingham, he was excited about his future with Rachel. In August 2003, the couple married in 2 ceremonies, one in Plymouth, UK, and one in Massachusetts, USA. Following the ceremony in the US, they had a reception in the UK. Neil created a family website where he shares updates about their life in Worcester. The couple's daughter, Lillian Rose, was born in April 2005, leading to their decision to move to the US. They initially lived with Rachel's mother, Priscilla Matarazzo, and stepfather, Joseph, in Carver, Massachusetts, before moving to their own home in Hopkinton on January 12, 2006. Their new home, located on a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 neighbors, offers a quiet setting just a short walk from the nearest major city. The 5-bedroom home rents for $1,500 a month, which is quite expensive. Neil, a computer programmer and IT professional, is having trouble finding work, which is causing financial stress and debt. To ease his financial burden, Neil turns to selling PC parts on eBay. However, his business is affected by customer complaints about undelivered orders, which brings in eBay's fraud investigators. During the proceedings, it is discovered that Neil has been using multiple accounts under different names. During this time, Neil runs a website called millionmaker.co.uk. The site promoted a get-rich-quick scheme targeting those in the adult entertainment industry, offering 24/7 support. The site promised a guaranteed monthly profit of $6,000 within the first 6 months. However, the site was eventually shut down. At the same time, Neil was using online platforms to find sexual partners. He visited sites such as Adult Friend Finder, Half Price Escorts, Nightlife, and Hot Local Euro Escorts for this purpose. Neil created a profile on Adult Friend Finder and emailed several women, saying he was looking for sexual partners. Investigators found incriminating content on his laptop, including a profile in which he mentioned wanting to meet American women of various ages to confirm rumors about their sexual prowess. His profile suggested a straightforward and mutually beneficial approach to meeting like-minded people. During his trial, Neil revealed that he had searched online for blondes, suggesting that he was still interested in such services. His online searches, most recently on January 18, 2006, included terms such as Worcester Escort Services and Worcester Escorts on Google. However, Neil's actions were not simply a search for escorts and other women. Neil conducted an alarming array of online searches. He searched for terms such as knife to the throat, kill, and how to kill with a knife. These searches were interspersed with more conventional searches for employment opportunities, travel, and ways to make quick money. Additionally, during this time, Neil traveled to Carver to visit his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo. Joe was a member of the Old Colony Sporting Club in Carver. After being taught how to shoot by Joe, Neil planned to steal a gun from Joe's collection at their home in Carver, Massachusetts. He went to his parents-in-law's home, retrieved the weapon from a storage location in the home, and drove back to Hopkinton with the gun in hand. Upon returning home, he discreetly hid the gun, waiting for the opportunity to commit a tragic act of violence against his family, before ending his own life. On January 20, 2006, Neil entered the bedroom where his wife Rachel and 9-month-old daughter Lillian were sleeping. He shot Rachel, 27, in the head, then shot Lillian, who was lying next to her. The bullet passed through Lillian's body and into Rachel's left chest. That same day, while his wife's family was still at work, he returned to Carver, returning the weapon without cleaning it. After leaving Carver, Neil went to Logan Airport in Boston. That evening, January 20, 2006, he withdrew a total of $800 from an ATM in 2 transactions. However, a third attempt to withdraw an additional $420 was rejected. The next day, Saturday, January 21st, 2006, Neil purchased a one-way ticket to London without luggage. At around 5 p.m., he boarded a British Airways flight, which departed from Boston at 8:15 p.m. That Saturday evening, Neil had invited some neighbors over for dinner. Joanna Gatley and her sister Maureen arrived at around 7 p.m. and found the house locked, but the lights were still on inside. Worried, they tried to call Rachel's mother, but were unable to reach her. Panicking, they decided to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly arrived at Neil's house at around 8:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, Sergeant Michael Sutton observed the scene, noticing inside the bedroom was a large, unmade bed with all the clothes piled in the middle of the bed. Except for the unmade bed, everything else in the house appeared to be in order. After completing the search, the police locked the house and left to continue patrolling. Although the police continued to search, Joanna and Maureen were still extremely worried about Rachel's family. They decided to spend the night in the car, waiting for the family to return. Despite the cold, they made several trips to the gas station bathroom during the night, anxiously waiting for any news. The next morning, Sunday, the sisters gained access to the house using the garage door code they had obtained from a neighbor the night before. When they entered the house, they found evidence that the family had just finished eating, with dishes and leftovers in the kitchen. The bathtub was still full of water, indicating that the parents had just bathed their newborn daughter. They went into the master bedroom, then to Lillian's bathroom, where classical music was playing, and finally to the living room. After Rachel's mother and stepfather arrived, they assessed the situation together and decided to report the family missing to the Hopkinton Police Department. Sergeant Michael returned to the house for a second search. This time, when he entered the basement, he noticed a strong, unpleasant odor that had not been there the day before. He followed the smell through the house until he reached the master bedroom. There, he found the bodies of Rachel and Lillian on the unmade bed, covered in clothes. Rachel's arms were stretched out across Lillian's chest, and her legs were drawn up beside her daughter. Both were wearing pajamas. An autopsy later revealed that Rachel had been shot in the head and Lillian in the torso. Further investigation found Rachel's DNA on the barrel of the gun and Neil's DNA on the stock. Neil Entwistle, 27, was initially listed as a missing person. Michael Fabry, Assistant District Attorney for Middlesex County, stated that the main priority on the first night was to find Neil as his location and condition were unknown, raising concerns for his safety. About 36 hours after returning to England, Neil visited his parents, Clifford and Yvonne. He had driven and spent the previous night at a hotel. During the visit, he told his parents that he had found the bodies of his wife and daughter. On Monday, January 23, 2006, Neil had a 2-hour telephone conversation with State Police Constable Robert Manning of the Hopkinton Police Department. The conversation was recorded and later played back in full during the court proceedings. Neil explained that after finding the bodies, he became extremely frightened and quickly went to his family. He told police that he had covered the bodies with sheets and then thought of the knives in the house. He picked up a large knife and stabbed himself, but was too afraid of the pain to use it. Neil appeared confused as to why he did not call an ambulance. Neil could not bring himself to use a knife to harm himself. He told police that he then drove the family car to his father-in-law Joe Matarazzo's house to retrieve a .22 LR revolver. However, he found the house locked. Rather than explore other options, Neil decided to fly back to England to stay with his parents. On January 26, 2006, U.S. police arrived in the UK to question Neil. The following day, January 27th, after speaking to a lawyer at his parents' home, Neil refused to meet with U.S. police at the U.S. Embassy in London. Rachel and her daughter Lillian were buried at Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza. They were buried together in a coffin. About 500 people attended the funeral, but Neil was absent. His name was not mentioned at the service and is not inscribed on their joint headstone. Instead, Neil sent a bouquet of flowers consisting of an orange rose and a white lily with a note attached to a ribbon. The note read, "My orange roses and lilies forever," and was signed Sakoko. Upon his return to England, Neil appeared to have returned to his usual routine. In February 2006, despite the constant media attention outside his parents' home in Waltham, he attended a dinner in Notting Hill with his old crew from York University. About a week after Rachel and Lillian's funerals, he also went to the movies. On February 8, 2006, the Middlesex District Attorney's Office issued a warrant for Neil's arrest. The following day, Neil was arrested by London's Metropolitan Police at Royal Oak Station as he prepared to board a train. At the time of his arrest, Neil had a notebook in which he planned to sell his story to the highest bidder. The notebook also included affectionate notes about his orange rose and a person named Lily. Neil referred to his wife as "my dearest and most beloved friend" in the notebook. He also wrote 2 letters to the editor sharing his story and had contacted a close friend about his plans. In one of the letters, Neil asked about the amount of money he might receive for sharing his entire story exclusively. Neil chose not to contest the extradition order. On February 15, he was returned to the United States and appeared in Framingham County Court. The court ordered him held without bail at the Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On March 28, 2006, Neil was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, as well as illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition. He pleaded not guilty to these charges. In December 2006, nearly a year after the tragic incident, Middlesex County Jail police found letters Neil had written to his parents and attorney. The letters revealed his struggles with depression and hinted that he may have been thinking about ending his life. As a result, he was temporarily transferred to Bridgewater Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation before being returned to Middlesex County Jail. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordless believed that Neil's behavior was the result of Asperger's syndrome, a view also shared by Dr. David Holmes. After several delays, jury selection for the trial in Middlesex Superior Court began in June 2008. Concerns arose over the high-profile nature of the case and whether Neil would receive a fair trial. The trial officially began on June 2, 2008, in Wrentham, Massachusetts. Elliot Weinstein led Neil's defense team. During the trial, Weinstein attempted to block the prosecution from using DNA evidence, but was unsuccessful. He also attempted to exclude other evidence found in the family home because the police did not have a warrant, but this effort was also unsuccessful. Neil chose not to call any witnesses or testify in his own defense. Those who attended the trial noted that Neil showed little emotion throughout the trial. On June 25, 2008, Neil Entwistle was convicted of first-degree murder, as well as possession of a firearm and ammunition without a license. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Neil told family and friends in court not to worry, saying, "I'll be fine." He was initially sent to the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. However, in August 2008, Neil shaved his head, thinking it would protect him from a white supremacist gang in prison. But instead of protecting him, the gang said they would kill him and viewed his actions as a futile attempt to gain their favor. As a result, Neil was transferred to protective custody for his own safety. Then, in December, Neil was transferred to the Old Colony Correctional Center, a medium-security prison in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The transfer was made for his own safety due to threats against his life, according to the Department of Corrections. The deaths of Rachel and her infant daughter had a profound impact on their family and friends. In the wake of the loss, the community rallied to offer support and comfort to her grieving family. The story of Neil Entwistle and Rachel Souza is a heartbreaking reminder that even people who appear to have perfect lives can be hiding difficulties. Hopefully, the stories of Rachel and her daughter will help us to stay vigilant and to cherish the time we have with our loved ones. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of the Raumen family. Jean-Claude Raumen was born on February 11, 1954, in Lille, France, and grew up in Clairvaux in the Jura region. He completed his baccalaureate in 1971. He began his studies at the University of Lyon but lasted only one semester before dropping out. He then went to medical school and eventually married a woman named Florence Cray. Florence Cray was born on March 6, 1956, and studied at the University of Lyon to become a doctor. There, she met Jean-Claude Raumen, a distant relative of her family. Initially, Jean-Claude did not attract Florence's attention, and they did not know each other very well, nor did they spend much time together. However, over time, through mutual friends and study sessions, they began to spend more time together. Jean-Claude immediately fell in love with Florence and tried to win her over. However, Florence saw him as just an ordinary guy, nothing special, and not very articulate. She had envisioned herself marrying a typical doctor, smart, attractive, and charming. After failing her second exam, she switched from medicine to pharmacy. Together with Jean-Claude, they continued to support each other in their studies and exams until they graduated in the next decade. In 1980, Florence and Jean-Claude Raumen got married. 6 years later, they had their first child, Caroline. 2 years after Caroline was born, their son, Antoine, was born. Florence lived a normal life as a wife and mother. She worked in local pharmacies to support her family, while her husband, Jean-Claude, worked at the World Health Organization in Geneva, a short distance from their home in France. After Christmas 1992, Florence went out and traveled around France for a few days. During that time, their children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, while Jean-Claude was working in Geneva. Jean-Claude Raumen kept his work life private, sharing very little information with his family and friends. Florence believed that her husband was involved in important and respected medical research. He maintained a clear boundary between his work and personal life, to the point that Florence could never call his office phone, as Jean-Claude insisted on not being disturbed during work hours. If Florence needed to contact him urgently, she could send him a text message, and he would call her back as soon as possible. Friends often asked about Jean-Claude's role at the WHO, wanting to know exactly what he did there. Florence usually dodged the question by giggling and admitting that she was not sure either. Sometimes, she joked that maybe one day she would find out her husband was a secret agent. Every year at Christmas, the WHO holds an office Christmas tree decoration event, allowing employees to bring their families to participate. In Christmas 1992, Florence learned about the event, but her husband never mentioned it to her. Florence felt anxious and insecure about his situation. From an acquaintance revealing that her husband was not listed in the WHO directory to discovering that her family was not mentioned at his workplace after more than a decade of service, these things may have affected Florence's mental state. The extent to which these revelations impacted Florence remains unclear, as it is not known whether she confronted her husband about the matter. According to Florence's brother, who went on holiday with the family, Florence appeared to fall into a deep depression during those days. During this time, family conversations became only speculative. As the new year of 1993 approached, Florence and Jean-Claude Raumen went shopping together a few days later, and Florence insisted that Jean-Claude buy a new suit, which she eventually convinced him to do. On that same day, after leaving from his wife, Jean-Claude went to a pharmacy and placed an order for January 9th. On the evening of January 5th, he withdrew 2,000 francs from 2 different ATMs. B. Before heading to a gun store, Jean-Claude gave 500 francs to a homeless person he met. After leaving the store, he took several items with him, including a pepper spray canister, a box of bullets, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun gun. The night passed peacefully upon his return home. On January 11th, at 4 a.m., an emergency call was made to the fire department, reporting that a fire was raging in the house. In the early hours of the morning, garbage collectors discovered the house on fire and quickly alerted the fire brigade. As the firefighters arrived and began extinguishing the flames, they noticed movement in an upstairs bedroom window, suggesting that someone inside needed help. Paramedics were called, and Jean-Claude Roman, who had been trapped in his residence, was rescued. When he was brought out, he appeared to be in a state of shock and unresponsive to the paramedics. Jean-Claude was then taken to the hospital, where he eventually fell into a coma. Within a short time, the fire was extinguished, allowing the fire brigade to enter. Jean-Claude's family friend Dr. Luc Ladmiral was called to the scene and witnessed the horrific sight as stretchers carried the charred bodies of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence away from the scene. When a fire causes death in a family, the police conduct an investigation to clarify the details of the incident. This process aims to provide closure to the grieving families and eliminate the possibility of any criminal activity. Consequently, after the tragic fire, law enforcement agencies launched an investigation due to the significant loss suffered by the family of a prominent doctor. During the autopsy of Florence's body, the medical team discovered evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. This raised suspicion and curiosity, especially after it was determined that Florence's death was caused by blunt force trauma rather than by the fire. The autopsy results of the children revealed another heart-wrenching truth. Contrary to initial assumptions, Caroline and Antoine did not die in the fire, rather, they had died earlier from gunshot wounds. This suggests that events occurred before the house burned down. Following the suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of Florence and her children, law enforcement launched an investigation. However, with Jean-Claude Roman in a coma and unable to provide any information, investigators faced challenges pursuing alternative leads, leaving the Rome home as the crime scene. Officials contacted the victim's family, acquaintances, and neighbors to gather more information about the events surrounding the case. Dr. Luc Ladmiral, who witnessed the victims being taken away from the scene, was also contacted as part of the investigation. Amidst the uncertainty, Luc struggles to make sense of the situation. When questioned by investigators about family enemies, Luc is unable to identify anyone. However, he is summoned for questioning a few days later. Luc finds himself under police investigation regarding his family's connections and recent events that may have caused the fire. Despite extensive questioning, the conclusion remains the same: the family has a good reputation, and no significant incidents occurred prior to the tragedy. Then attention turns to Jean-Claude, who reveals a shocking piece of information: he has never been employed by the World Health Organization, nor has he ever lectured at the University of Dijon. In fact, he is not a qualified doctor, let alone employed in any medical capacity. Luc is initially skeptical, but as he recalls their shared school experience, his suspicions grow. This leads to a startling realization. He tells the authorities about an incident that occurred during his sophomore year when he noticed Jean-Claude absent from an exam. The change in Jean-Claude's usual behavior worries Luc. When he visits Jean-Claude at home, he observes signs of poor health, including clammy skin, a pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude claims he is being treated for lymphoma, a manageable form of cancer, but the condition is exacerbated by stress related to the exam. At Jean-Claude's request, Luc pledges to keep this information confidential, especially from Florence. Investigators determine that Luke has no further details. They therefore wait for the results of the forensic examination of the burnt house, hoping to gather more information for the investigation. Investigators note unusual details in the house. They find that all the doors are locked from the inside, indicating that no one had illegally entered. Initially, the hypothesis of an accidental fire is put forward, but this changes when the condition of the bodies is revealed. The new findings point to a more sinister scenario, necessitating an interview with Jean-Claude. While he remains unconscious for weeks, the authorities focus on him as the main suspect, initiating a full investigation. Although Jean-Claude does not have a medical degree, his long studies at the university raise suspicions. When the educational institution is contacted, they confirm that he had been studying for 12 years. Although he successfully completed the first-year exam, he failed the second-year exam. Taking advantage of the lack of admission restrictions, Jean-Claude repeatedly re-enrolled in the second year throughout his studies. Despite devoting much time and effort to studying, attending lectures, and reviewing medical texts, he still cannot pass the second exam, which is puzzling. It is possible that staying up late and missing the exam was a significant factor. He was given the opportunity to retake the exam several months later, but he did not take it. As investigators continue to probe the deaths of Florence and the children, they face another horrifying discovery. Jean-Claude's uncle, wanting to break the bad news to Jean-Claude's parents, goes to their home only to be met with an unusual silence. Upon entering, he discovers the bodies of Jean-Claude's parents, both victims of gunshot wounds. The investigation confirms that Jean-Claude's parents had been shot with the same type of gun used to kill Antoine and Caroline. Their deaths occur close together, suggesting that the events are related. After the tragedies are made public, the mystery deepens. The police receive a call from a woman who does not want to reveal her identity or any personal information and is hesitant to participate in the investigation. However, she provides one crucial piece of information: she has become romantically involved with Jean-Claude after meeting him in Paris. She also claims that he is not a researcher at the World Health Organization. He had deceived her into believing that he was an influential expert. The woman was tricked into believing that Jean-Claude was actively involved in and funding important research projects. He also described banks in Geneva as very profitable. Using his POS, he deceived her into investing money in a Swiss bank with an 18% interest rate, which turned out to be a trap. Employing persuasive techniques, Jean-Claude convinced his girlfriend to invest her money. She was initially hesitant, but they eventually reached an agreement. She would provide him with 990,000 francs to invest, hoping to receive a return in 3 months. As the payment deadline approached in early January, the woman reminded Jean-Claude of their agreement, stressing that she needed the money to support herself and her family. After some negotiation, they arranged to meet for dinner. He invited her to dinner with a prominent political figure, intending to generate interest and hopefully recover her investment. On the agreed date, he picked her up in Paris to begin the trip they had been anticipating. As night fell, Jean-Claude and the woman got lost. Suddenly, he stopped the car and attacked her inside. He used tear gas, stun guns, and cables against her. However, she fought fiercely for her life and managed to escape from the car. He chased her but agreed to stop when he begged for mercy. It seemed he realized his plan had failed and pleaded for forgiveness. The excuse he gave the woman was one that had become familiar to investigators. He claimed that his lymphoma was flaring up, causing him to behave erratically and unlike himself. The woman agreed to keep quiet about the incident in exchange for Jean-Claude bringing her home safely. Investigators started to piece together a better understanding of him. He was a pathological liar, a manipulator, and a con man. The question that haunted the detectives was he also a killer? After waking from his coma, Jean-Claude was quickly approached by investigators to discuss their remaining suspicions. They expected him to confess, but he chose to remain silent. He sat in his hospital bed, staring blankly into space, unresponsive when asked about the events of January 9th, the origin of the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, the serious injuries his wife suffered, and the discovery of his parents' deaths. He was subjected to repeated interrogations, but despite relentless questioning, he refused to reveal anything. It was only when investigators informed him that they knew the truth, that he was not a doctor and was unemployed, that he changed. What prompted him to finally break his silence remains unclear, but he eventually began to talk. According to him, on the night of January 9th, Jean-Claude and Florence were having a typical evening at home. After putting their children to bed, they retired to their bedroom. According to his recollection, the entire situation came to a sudden end when he recalled the horrific scene of finding his wife sprawled on the bed, surrounded by blood and holding a blood-stained rolling pin. It is unclear what happened. Perhaps there was an argument, but Jean-Claude went to bed with his wife and woke up the next morning to prepare breakfast for the children. Caroline and Antoine sat on the couch, watching cartoons that their father had chosen. He served each of them a bowl of cereal before joining them to watch TV. When the children asked about their mother's absence, he told them that she was not feeling well and needed more rest. That morning, Jean-Claude noticed that Caroline was feeling ill and was concerned about her health. He guided Caroline to the bedroom upstairs. Caroline then lay face down on the bed with a pillow over her head, but the reason for this was not explained. Jean-Claude was unable to provide a clear explanation to investigators regarding the chain of events. However, he speculated that the incident may have been related to a game he had been playing with his daughter. He then used a .22 caliber rifle fitted with a silencer to fatally shoot his 7-year-old daughter in the back of the head. Antoine similarly met a tragic end. After the incident, his memory became hazy. The evidence presented at trial showed that he left home, bought a newspaper, and went about his daily activities, appearing normal to people. He then returned home and watched television. Although Jean-Claude denied these details at trial, one event was certain: he received an invitation from his parents to have lunch on the day of the incident. He accepted the invitation, left his quiet abode to drive to his parents' house, and joined them for lunch. He then tricked his father into going upstairs under the pretext of checking a faulty boiler. Despite his father's old age, he still attempted to perform the requested inspection but was unexpectedly shot in the back by his own son. When he returned to his mother's place, he did not make up any excuses this time. His mother became the only victim, shot by him when he faced her. The motive behind these actions remains unclear. Before leaving, he also killed the family dog. When asked about this at trial, it was the only time he showed remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears and revealed that the dog had been very much loved by his children, bringing back memories of Caroline. At that point, Jean-Claude decided to return home and commit suicide. However, his plan did not go as intended. He had previously had a mistress who had provided him with 990,000 francs with the promise of an investment scheme, which was how Jean-Claude supported himself. He told many people, including his relatives and Florence's family, stories of the profits from these investments. People who trusted he entrusted him with managing their finances. This allowed he to gradually accumulate a large sum of money. He then transferred the money to private bank accounts in Geneva, avoiding the scrutiny of tax authorities and others. He had carefully managed the family finances, ensuring that his wife, Florence, had no knowledge of his fraudulent activities. However, the time had come to face the consequences of what he had done. As expected, people began to demand that he return our money along with the promised profits. Unfortunately, this was an obligation he could not fulfill. All of his income was immediately used to meet current needs, leaving him with virtually no savings, despite having accumulated over 2 million francs over the years. It was time for him to come clean and share the truth with Florence and the others who had entrusted him with their money. He found that he could no longer maintain this lies, and the mounting pressure made him feel trapped with no clear way out. Like many others, he convinced himself that by ending the lives of his loved ones, he would save his family from the consequences of his wrongdoings. He then planned to commit suicide to avoid facing the harsh reality. He believed that he could continue lying forever and never thought that he would be discovered or that he would have to confess. He kept coming up with other lies to maintain the pattern throughout his life. On June 23, 1996, the trial of Jean-Claude began. During the trial, he sat silently, avoiding eye contact and keeping his head down, with police on either side. On July 2, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for 22 years for the murder of his wife, children, and parents. In 2019, Jean-Claude Roman applied for release from prison to live in a monastery. During his incarceration, he reportedly became a devout Christian, accepted his mistakes, and vowed to spend the rest of his life repenting as punishment. The judge accepted his plea, citing his good behavior as a factor worth considering. However, it is unfortunate that all the victims suffered at the hands of this deceitful, manipulative, and cruel man. As we reflect on this heartbreaking event, we cannot help but feel compassion for those whose lives were taken so suddenly and for the families and friends who suffered their loss. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Grace Mill Lane. Grace Emmy Rose Mill Lane was born on December 2, 1996, in Wickford, Essex, to Gillian and David Mill Lane. She is the youngest of 3 siblings and is known as a loving, outgoing, fun-loving, family-oriented, creative, and artistic girl. The family is very close, so Grace keeps in touch with her siblings and parents every day, even while studying advertising and marketing at Lincoln University, where she is living away from home. In 2018, 21-year-old Grace Mill Lane graduated with a BA in advertising and marketing. Like many young people her age, Grace decided to take a year off before settling down in her career to celebrate the completion of her university degree. She chose to take a year off to travel around South America before going to New Zealand to tour. In October 2018, Grace embarked on a 10-month solo adventure. First, she traveled to Peru. Then, on November 19th, Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, preparing for a 2-week stay on the North Island. During her time in New Zealand, Grace met a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, whom she had matched with on Tinder. Jesse was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand. He grew up in Wellington. As a child, his parents divorced, and he was raised by his grandparents for a time. As a teenager, he moved to Australia with his mother. However, in 2016, he returned to New Zealand and lived in a hostel in Wellington. Little did Grace know that Jesse had a dark side. He was known to be very charismatic, using his charm to manipulate others. Jesse struggled to keep a job or a place to live for long due to his constant lying. On one occasion, he lied to his former landlord, claiming to be a newly signed professional baseball player with the New Zealand national baseball team, the Black Sox. He pretended that his contract money would soon be transferred to pay rent. This deception lasted for 2 months until the landlord confirmed with Black Sox management that they had no idea who he was. Unfortunately, the landlord also learned that Jesse had run away without warning, costing him over $1,700. On multiple occasions, Jesse claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, that he came from a millionaire family wanting to buy a top restaurant in Auckland, and that he had connections in the New Zealand Immigration Department, among other lies. However, the truth is that Jesse is simply a delusional person, only able to impress others with his wild fabrications. His former roommates at Green Lane found him creepy and untrustworthy before he moved into City Life apartments. A woman he lived with claimed that he stole money from her house and then ran away. This cost the landlord at City Life thousands of dollars after Jesse lied about receiving a monthly salary and not paying rent. Jesse is a mystery to many. He often lies and frequently gets away with it. Back in the hostel where Grace was staying, she was happily conversing with Jesse. She was charmed by Jesse, even sending a text to her close friend Anna back home, telling her that she clicked with this guy. As her 22nd birthday was the next day, she decided to meet Jesse, who lived nearby, to get to know him better. On the day they were supposed to meet, Grace was preparing for her big party, feeling excited and optimistic about the evening ahead. She left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. and walked into the city center in a black dress, holding a small handbag, unaware that she was about to encounter a tragic event. The evening went off without a hitch as they went to a local bar and left together around 9:30 p.m. The next day was Grace's 22nd birthday, and her family and friends tried to contact her to congratulate her, but Grace did not respond, causing concern and panic among her family members. Grace had kept her family updated about her trip, providing them with details and photos. However, her family contacted Auckland police and reported Grace missing. Initially, detectives did not suspect Grace of any wrongdoing. They knew that Grace had not returned to her hostel on the night of December 1st and thought she might be staying with some new friends. They quickly searched for Grace on the night of her disappearance, using CCTV cameras across the city, and identified the mystery man with whom Grace had been seen that night as Jesse. That evening, Jesse met Grace. Before the appointment, he had gone to a local bar called the Bluestone Room, which was next to the City Life Hotel where he was staying. About half an hour before meeting Grace, Jesse was seen drinking 4 beers there, a lone figure in a pub further down Mill Lane. Meanwhile, Grace was waiting at the foot of the Sky Tower, where they had agreed to meet. This shows her anticipation of possibly starting a romantic relationship during the holiday. The Sky Tower is one of the most recognizable icons of New Zealand's largest city, dominating the skyline and serving as the focal point for many events. Most importantly, it is a public place where Grace would feel safer meeting someone. When Jesse arrived, the two recognized each other immediately. He hugged her as she smiled and walked toward him. The first place they visited was a burger restaurant and bar located on the first floor of the Sky City complex. During their time in Sky City, their every move was recorded by cameras. They were recorded as they went up the escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar, where they ordered cocktails and then sat together at a table to chat. About an hour and a half later, they left the bar and went to a nearby restaurant called the Mexican Cafe. After drinking 2 margaritas and a pitcher of sangria, they left the restaurant and went to the Bluestone Room, where Jesse had been drinking alone earlier. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse pulled Grace close to him and kissed her for about a second. In the next scene, they continued to kiss. Jesse then left, and Grace checked her phone, sending a final text message to her friend Anna. Grace then also left. Jesse used Grace's phone to post a message on her Facebook profile, saying she was beautiful and radiant. After around 9:30 p.m., the footage shows them leaving from the other side and going to the Mill Lane lobby of the City Life Hotel, then entering the elevator. Jesse searched for his key card as they headed toward room 308. It is unclear exactly what happened in room 308 after they arrived. However, by around 1:30 a.m., Grace had died in her room. It was confirmed that Grace never left the building, and Jesse did not call emergency services or any other assistance when she died. After Grace died, Jesse conducted several internet searches that demonstrated he was not only unconcerned about her death but was actively planning to cover it up. The next morning, after Grace had died in room 308, the man messaged another woman he had met on Tinder, trying to arrange a date for later that day. He was then caught on CCTV moving from his room to an entertainment outlet to buy a suitcase, then to a supermarket to buy some toiletries. He subsequently rented a red Toyota, and while Grace was still lying dead in the hotel room, he went out in the afternoon to meet the woman he had messaged earlier that day at a bar called The Dry in the upscale Auckland suburb of Ponsonby. The woman, who was a former reporter, appeared calm when she met Jesse at The Dry. During their conversation, he mentioned that all his friends were police officers and that a close friend was about to move to New Zealand to become a prosecutor. As they discussed a murder case she had worked on, he commented that it was a shame men could make mistakes and face long sentences. He then went on to talk about a man who had asked his girlfriend to have sex in a rough manner, which resulted in her death, making the woman feel uncomfortable. Jesse continued to lie throughout the conversation, making her increasingly uneasy. When she left the bar, although she felt very nervous, Jesse later texted her asking for another date, but she declined. After he returned to his room at around 5:45 p.m. on December 2nd, he rented a carpet cleaning device called the Rug Doctor to clean the carpet, under the pretext of removing red wine stains. After parking his rental car outside the hotel, he took a cart from the front desk, went upstairs, and returned with a cart carrying 2 large suitcases, one of which was identical to the one he had purchased earlier. He loaded the suitcases onto the cart and drove to a nearby parking lot. The silver suitcase contained Grace's body, while the second suitcase served as a cover to avoid suspicion. Throughout the day, surveillance cameras recorded him changing his clothes several times. Early the next morning, around 6:15 a.m., Jesse left the hotel and drove away, stopping only to buy a shovel at a store in the suburb. B.S. During this time, Grace's parents became concerned because she did not respond to their birthday greetings. 3 days later, Grace's parents reported her missing, and a massive search was launched. On December 7, 2018, Grace's father, David Millane, arrived in New Zealand and made an emotional appeal for any information regarding his daughter's disappearance. Jesse was questioned as a suspect individual after Grace's mother discovered a message he had left on her Facebook page at 9:29 p.m. on December 1st, just 11 minutes before they left the Bluestone room and went to his room. Detective Diana Levinson first questioned Jesse. He claimed that he had met Grace and parted ways with her at 10 p.m. on Saturday, which he stated was the last time he had seen her. However, detectives obtained CCTV footage from the hotel, proving that he had lied. During his second interview, he had no choice but to admit to killing Grace. However, he claimed that she had died accidentally during sex after he asking him to strangle her in an attempt to enhance their experience. Following the questioning, he was arrested, and police took Grace's body to the hospital. Grace's body was found around 4 p.m. on December 9th and buried on Scenic Drive in Waitakere Ranges Regional Park. A post-mortem examination was conducted in relation to Grace's death. It found that Grace had been strangled and had bruises on her body, indicating that she had been restrained. The murder trial took place in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Jesse attempted to explain Grace's death as an accident following a fight that went wrong, but the jury rejected his claim and found him guilty. Jesse, aged 28, was convicted of murder on November 22, 2019. During his trial, he was described as a man whose behavior was so pathological that some of the women he met or communicated with on Tinder felt very uncomfortable. It was later discovered that, before meeting Grace, he had taken another British tourist on a Tinder date and brought her to his hotel room in Auckland 8 months earlier. At the age of 21, Jessie sexually assaulted a tourist. When she refused to have sex with him, she cried and froze in fear. She kept the attack a secret until she recognized Jessie from media reports on the day he was charged with Grace's murder. A woman who had been communicating with him online became cautious about meeting him. She shared a series of messages in which he detailed his sexual preferences and admitted why he enjoyed them. It is speculated that Jessie's desire to dominate contributed to Grace's death. In a separate trial, he was convicted of assaulting his former partner. For months, he used violence, threatened her with a knife, and forced her to perform humiliating acts after telling her he had been sent by the CIA to kill her. Jessie refused to admit guilt and showed no remorse. On February 21, 2020, Jessie was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 17 years. Grace's story has raised awareness about the importance of safety for travelers, especially young women, when exploring the world. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. Her parents are Donald Tihara and Diana Parle. Her father, Donald, worked at a shipyard, and her mother, Diana, ran the household. Dawn is the oldest child and only daughter, with 3 younger brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek. Her family lives in Bremerton, Washington. According to her mother Diana, Dawn showed her religious devotion from an early age, embracing her faith and accepting God into her life when she was 4 years old. Dawn's childhood was difficult, however. Her parents suffered from anxiety and depression, leading to frequent conflicts at home. Despite these challenges in her childhood, Dawn did well in school, promising herself to get good grades. At age 12, she entered the Scripps National Spelling Bee, an experience that not only led her to the White House but also gave her the opportunity to meet the late President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated from Bremerton Christian School as valedictorian in 1988 before attending Northwest College of the Church of God in Seattle. While in college, Dawn met Nick Hatchey and they quickly formed a strong bond. However, her friends were concerned when she started calling him the one after only a few dates. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would truly care for and support her, but they worried that Nick was too aggressive and self-assured, which didn't seem to fit Dawn's personality. Interestingly, Nick's upbringing has some similarities to Dawn's. Nick was born and raised in Poulsbo, a coastal city in Washington. His family life was difficult from an early age. His father, Dan, was constantly immersed in his work as a mechanic, always distant when at home, neglecting his time and responsibilities for the family. His mother, Sandra, ran a daycare in the home and provided foster care, but Nick felt abandoned. He often confided in friends that he felt less loved than his siblings and even his foster children, and that his mother's affection for him was distasteful. Life was difficult with a depressed mother and a father who often neglected the family. Nick felt abandoned and emotionally isolated. Despite this, he found comfort in the Bible and became deeply involved in Christianity. His faith gave him confidence throughout his adolescence. Nick and Dawn first met in college. At first, Dawn's friends were confused by her interest in Nick, whose personality was the complete opposite of hers. Over time, they noticed a significant change in Dawn's behavior. Normally, she was confident, outgoing, independent, motivated, and always striving to achieve new goals. However, when she was with Nick, her personality changed dramatically. She became shy, introverted, and indecisive, often putting Nick's interests above her own, even when they made her feel uncomfortable. It seemed that Nick's influence brought out the worst in her, rather than the best. Despite this, their love continued to grow and their relationship remained strong. In 1990, Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach and they became engaged. They married on April 20, 1991, and then moved back to Bremerton. By this time, both Dawn and Nick had completed their education. Dawn began working as a loan officer, and Nick began his work as a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island, near Seattle. Nick had a desire to become a youth pastor, specifically targeting Christ Community Church due to his relationship with his former youth pastor, Bob, also known as P.B. Smith. At the time, P.B. Smith remained at the church, having overseen the church's affairs since the late 1980s, but now partnered with Pastor Robert Billy Craig to lead the congregation. P.B. Smith took a more friendly but conservative approach to church leadership, while Pastor Robert was known for his strict teachings. In their marriage, Nick made decisions without his wife Dawn, largely because they adhered to the principles of Christian fundamentalism. These principles dictate that the wife submit to the authority of her husband, which Nick and Dawn believed was in line with God's plan. At Christ Community Church, this ideology was clearly promoted and considered acceptable. The church even performed exorcisms for its members, encouraged large families as a divine mandate, and advocated homeschooling for children. Modesty in women was emphasized and questions about sexuality were taboo. Those who disagreed with these norms risked expulsion from the church, creating a climate of silence among dissenters for fear of expulsion. Dawn and her congregation are mired in what many call a cult, with her husband, Nick, playing a key role in these dangerous activities. Initially, Nick admires P.B. Smith, but he soon becomes dissatisfied with P.B. Smith's laid-back approach and feels he has not learned enough. He turns his admiration to Pastor Robert, who has a more extreme and strict approach. Nick seeks direct advice from Robert, distancing himself from his close relationship with P.B. Smith. In contrast, Pastor Robert sees Nick as an opportunity to advance his own agenda. He wants to remove P.B. Smith from his position as senior pastor and take control of the church. Robert's intentions are not sincere and he uses Nick to achieve his own goals. Meanwhile, Nick and his wife Dawn are facing challenges in their personal lives. They are constantly moving from house to house, renovating properties to sell. Dawn grew tired of this lifestyle and longed to settle down in a permanent home. By 1997, these issues were causing tension in their relationship. Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton, planning to move in, renovate, and make it their home. However, the purchase, renovation, and home business plunged the couple into debt. Although their relationship seemed perfect, with Dawn seemingly a supportive wife who agreed with Nick's plans, there were underlying issues that were not immediately apparent. At the same time, Nick was getting into more debt by frequently lending money to people in their church. Nick embarked on his ambitious project of establishing a Christian youth camp. Despite financial difficulties, his passion for the project kept him going. He searched for the perfect location in Jefferson County, confident that he would find the ideal location. His determination intensified when a congregant, a woman named Sandy Glass, asserted receiving a divine vision affirming that the property Nick had his eye on was destined to become the site of the youth camp he envisioned. Sandy Glass, then in her early 20s, had faced hardships in her life. She had lost her first boyfriend to illness and her father in a construction accident. Her brother was addicted to drugs. Sandy was married to Jimmy, a carpenter, and they were struggling financially. A stay-at-home mother, Sandy depended on Jimmy's income, but her tendency to overspend often led to arguments between them. These disagreements sometimes caused Jimmy to scream or retreat, spending hours at the bar venting his frustrations. To resolve their marital problems, the couple sought help from the church and began attending marriage counseling sessions led by Nick, who had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, many parishioners filed complaints with Robert about Nick's counseling style, feeling uncomfortable with the way he prioritized intimate and often sexual topics over other important issues. Because of their trust in P.B. Smith, who was still affiliated with the church, members felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with the role if he were not trustworthy. However, in the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert took over as senior pastor, a move that was fully supported by the church council, replacing P.B. Smith. P.B. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also churchgoers, considered Sandy and Jimmy's decision to seek church intervention to be a hasty one. They even questioned Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. Their concerns grew when they noticed that Nick focused a lot of his attention on Sandy, rather than Sandy and Jimmy as a couple. This attention was not limited to counseling sessions. Nick and Sandy spent a lot of time talking on the phone and meeting outside of church. Jimmy's parents felt that the relationship between Nick and Sandy was unacceptable. They spent a lot of time together and seemed closer than a normal counselor and client should be. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately about it. She told him that he needed to focus on his marriage and that his actions were inappropriate. After much complaining, Pastor Robert stepped in and told Sandy that her relationship with Nick was not working and needed to end. Sandy was angry with Pastor Robert's advice because she believed that she and Nick had a special relationship with God. She wrote him a letter saying that his judgment made it difficult for her to think that he believed in her ability to listen to God and help others. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, as well as Jimmy's children from his previous marriage to Sandy, felt hurt and betrayed. One of the children even told Jimmy that Nick and Sandy had discussed Nick becoming their new father after Jimmy's death. Dawn began sharing with friends at church about her financial difficulties and her desire to have children, a desire that Nick strongly opposed. As 1997 drew to a close, Nick had relationships with several women in addition to Sandy. He engaged in private conversations and lengthy phone calls with these women. At the same time, Sandy's alleged visions grew stronger, prompting Nick to prioritize the establishment of her youth camp and devote more time to their relationship, as she believed they were destined to be together. On the contrary, Dawn made a lot of effort to rekindle Nick's happiness with her, even trying to lose weight. Some of the women in the congregation supported her, telling her that the problems in their relationship were not her fault, but Nick's own. Unfortunately, Dawn's life with Nick did not turn out as she had hoped when they got married. When Christmas came, Dawn woke up feeling unwell with a cold. Despite being sick, she and Nick spent the day with their family. That evening, they visited P.B. Smith's house and spent time with his family. Nick had plans to go hunting with Lindsay, P.B. Smith's daughter, and her friends the next morning, the 26th. Nick met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County to go hunting just before dawn. They spent a few hours in the woods without shooting anything and decided to leave. Around 9 a.m., they went to a local diner for breakfast. While eating, Nick suddenly stood up, looking worried, and said, "Dawn and I haven't opened our Christmas presents yet." He left the diner at 9:30 a.m. and arrived home at 10 a.m. to find his wife dead in a fire. When police arrived on the scene, they discovered that the fire had initially started in the bedroom, due to a malfunctioning space heater. The fire quickly spread due to newspapers and wrapping paper in the room, and was made worse by multiple propane tanks on the floor. Nick told friends at the diner that he and his family had not opened their Christmas presents. But he told police a different story. According to Nick, they had actually opened their presents the night before. He said that Dawn had gone to bed feeling unwell and left the wrapping paper scattered around. Nick also confirmed that he had received a propane tank as a Christmas present. The couple was in the process of renovating their home and had used the heater to stay warm during the winter. However, These old fireplaces were not as safe as modern ones and often caused fires and deaths. The police found no inconsistencies in Nick's story. As a local pastor, Nick's status in the community gave the police no reason to suspect anything else. And his wife's death, which was ruled an accident. The congregation was concerned for Nick's health and wanted to support him during this difficult time. Pastor Robert even offered to try to revive Dawn through prayer, but Nick refused, saying he did not want her to suffer any potential pain. This refusal surprised Robert, as Nick had previously been willing to participate in church activities, including the exorcisms they had performed. Mary Glass, Sandy's mother-in-law, immediately suspected Nick of being involved in Dawn's death. Convinced that it was no accident, she urged her husband to report the situation to the police, but this never happened. Soon after, the police officially declared Dawn's death an accident and referred the case to Nick's insurance company. Nick began the process of collecting on Dawn's life insurance, which raised some suspicions from family and friends. They thought it was unusual for Nick to settle the insurance so quickly after Dawn's death, but they understood that the couple had significant debt and that Nick needed the money to pursue his plans for the youth camp. Some church members found Nick's way of grieving unusual, but they refrained from expressing concern, believing that everyone deals with grief differently. The church community came together to remember Dawn's life at her funeral. Family and friends shared stories and remembered her life. Although everyone was sad, Nick remained calm throughout and even gave a 45-minute speech in Dawn's honor. When friends helped him clean out his house, they found several photos of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet, making it seem as though he wanted to throw them away. After that, Nick's behavior became increasingly harsh and insensitive, not only toward some church members but also toward neighbors and friends. He had many romantic relationships with women in the congregation. In a shocking turn of events, Nick began an intimate relationship with Diana, Dawn's mother, under the guise of grief over his widowhood. His actions became too much for Pastor Robert to bear, and Nick was asked to leave Christ Community Church. This eviction had a significant impact on Nick, marking the beginning of his growing troubles. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney. The district attorney offered Sandy immunity in exchange for her testimony about a secret she had kept since December 26, 1997. According to Sandy, on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick called her and said, "I did it." However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by another incoming call on Sandy's phone, leaving Nick waiting to answer the call from someone at the church who had informed him of Dawn's case. After the second call ended, Sandy returned to the conversation with Nick and asked him to clarify what he meant. Nick simply repeated, "It's over, it's over." Sandy did not ask for further details about the call for several weeks. Eventually, Sandy confronted Nick, who confessed to giving Dawn an overdose of Benadryl and then suffocating her by placing a plastic bag over her face. Tragically, Dawn was still partially conscious and aware of what her husband was doing as she suffocated. After she died, Nick carefully placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, including under her body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He then turned on the heater to burn and start the fire, in an attempt to destroy any evidence of the crime and make it look like an accident. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. The pathologist who examined Dawn ruled her death an accidental fire. They missed crucial evidence of carbon monoxide binding to red blood cells, suggesting that she had not been breathing during the fire. Despite having 5 times the normal amount of Benadryl in her system, the pathologist concluded that the amount was not enough to cause respiratory failure, arguing that even if Dawn had been drowsy, she would have reacted to the increased temperature. Notably, crime scene photos showed newspapers under Dawn's body, a disturbing detail that was largely overlooked. A fire marshal became suspicious and spoke to the police, but he had no authority to decide whether Dawn's death was accidental. Nick was arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot. He adamantly denied any involvement in Dawn's death and claimed the church was trying to frame him. Despite his claims that church members could cause serious harm, Nick was charged with first-degree murder and his bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's account, when relayed to the police, added to the frustration. Over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. And her reason for cooperating, stemming from anger over Nick's relationships with other women in the church. Church members reported Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships when questioned. They were also upset that he did not buy a tombstone for Dawn after receiving the life insurance payout. On September 17, 2001, Nick pleaded not guilty in court. He claimed that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert had a dark influence beyond the understanding of the police. When Nick's trial began, Nick Hatcheny was charged with aggravated first-degree murder, which carries a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses, including women who were involved with Nick and church members who had been counseled by him, shared their testimonies with the jury. These testimonies showed the major impact the church had on their lives, including experiences of visions and messages supposedly from God. Nick used these to control and manipulate them. P.B. Smith's daughter also testified, sharing how she met Nick through her father when she was a teenager. Nick seduced her, and they had sex after Dawn's death. This continued until she moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts also testified, emphasizing that Dawn's body held important clues regarding her death. However, these indicators were ignored, as mentioned earlier, because Nick was a pastor. However, on December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury deliberated for a day before returning a guilty verdict on first-degree murder against Nick Hatcheny. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick addressed the court, which was filled with Dawn's loved ones. He continued to maintain his innocence, but also expressed remorse for his actions and sadness for his family's loss, saying that Dawn deserved better treatment. He was sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court resulted in his life sentence being modified. The appeal argued that, because Dawn died as a result of Nick strangling her, the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder in connection with her death by arson did not match her actual cause of death. The defense argued that Nick therefore did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the appeal, changing Nick's sentence to 26 years in prison. While in prison, Nick was involved in many positive initiatives. He co-founded the Environmental Progress Reentry Network and introduced a waste management system that used vermicompost. Nick could be released from prison soon, as he is eligible for parole in 2025. Sadly, Dawn's life took a tragic turn. She thought she had found the right person, but the reality was very different. This led to a devastating betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren is a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to a jeweler in Antwerp named Jan de Wilde. They has 2 children, Vincent de Wilde and Carol de Wilde. Although she works in the family jewelry store, Elsa's real passion is skydiving. Els began skydiving with her husband in 1994. Gradually, her passion for skydiving grew rapidly over time. With over 2,300 jumps under her belt, she became an experienced skydiver. She devoted most of her weekends and holidays to the sport. In 1998, Els began skydiving in formation, and 3 years later, in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed in the 2003 World Parachute Championships, but Els was forced to leave the team in 2004 due to health problems stemming from a persistent hernia. After recovering, she turned to parachuting as a recreational activity instead of continuing to compete professionally. He became a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club, and by 2006, her jump total had exceeded 2,300. In the Parachute Club, she formed a close friendship with a fellow parachutist and schoolteacher, a 26-year-old named Els Klotmans. To differentiate between the two of them within the club, Els van Doren suggested calling Els Klotmans by the nickname Babs. They both learned to parachute under the guidance of Marcel Summers, another club member who knew both women. The trio developed a deep friendship and even became companions on their skydiving adventures. However, over time, Els found herself growing attached to Marcel, despite her husband. Their friendship gradually developed into a romantic relationship. Since her family was accustomed to her being away on weekends for the skydiving club, they did not suspect anything regarding her relationship with Marcel. Indeed, they often went to Marcel's apartment on weekends and stayed together without worries. Unbeknownst to Els and Babs, they not only shared the same name but also loved the same man. Marcel secretly maintained romantic relationships with both women. To keep the two relationships balanced, Marcel created a schedule. He devoted Fridays to Babs and Saturdays to Els. This arrangement initially worked to Marcel's advantage. However, it did not last long due to an unexpected event that occurred one particular weekend. On the evening of Friday, November 10, 2006, Babs went to Marcel's house as she did every week. At that time, she was unaware that Els had planned to surprise Marcel with an unexpected visit that night. Babs and Marcel had dinner together, and then they returned to Marcel's apartment. There, they found Els waiting outside the door. The content of their conversation is unknown, but it is certain that Babs did not sleep in the same bed as Marcel that night. Instead, Babs slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Els and Marcel went into the bedroom. In the living room, Babs discovered Elsa's parachute lying next to the other parachute equipment. She felt deeply hurt and betrayed that her friend had deceived and replaced her. These pent-up emotions pushed Babs to the point of committing a reckless act, leading to tragic consequences that no one could have foreseen. Then, on November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. The plan was for Els, Babs, Marcel, and another skydiver named Tom to jump in a four-person formation at an altitude of 13,000 feet. In this formation, they would link arms before releasing and deploying their parachutes. As they prepared to jump, Els, Marcel, and Tom exited the plane as planned. However, it appears that Babs, perhaps due to a delay or on purpose, jumped a little later than the others. During the free fall, Babs was unable to catch up with the group. At 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els, and Tom broke formation, preparing to deploy their parachutes safely. At this point, it was clear that something serious had occurred, as Els tried to deploy her parachute by pulling the cord, but it refused to open. Trying to stay calm, she recalled the emergency procedures from her training. Having encountered a failed parachute before, she had successfully deployed her backup parachute on that occasion. However, in this case, hurtling through free fall at around 200 kilometers per hour, she had only 20 seconds or less to make a life-saving maneuver and land successfully. Despite her efforts, pulling the backup cord proved futile, and the parachute still did not respond. As her desperation grew, she continued to pull on both the main and backup parachutes, but there was no response. Marcel, who was at an altitude of 800 meters, observed Els, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and sensed that something was wrong because her parachute had not yet deployed. However, he could do nothing but watch the horrifying scene unfold. In a last desperate attempt, Els tried to untangle her parachute cord, hoping to activate it, but her fate was sealed. Meanwhile, in the town of Upab, as these events unfolded, a woman was hanging her clothes out in her garden. A loud noise suddenly made her panic. Looking up, she witnessed a woman swooping down from the sky with a parachute aimed toward her garden. This sight was not unusual, as her residence was only a few kilometers away from the parachute club and its landing site. When she turned back to continue her laundry, the woman discovered a white cloth caught in the top of her bush. Moving closer, she saw a figure lying in the bushes. She quickly called her husband, who was also in the garden doing maintenance, and they contacted emergency services. It was Els, whom they assumed was one of the parachutists, but unfortunately, she showed no signs of life. Marcel, on the other hand, had found a safe landing spot, frantically calling for Els and trying to locate her. Spotting an ambulance, he gave chase, following it to the NEA RBY location where Els had landed. When he lunged toward her, he had to be restrained to allow the rescue team to approach. When the emergency services arrived, resuscitation efforts were made, but to no avail. Els was dead. Marcel insisted on keeping Elsa's parachute intact, stating that it was unusual that neither the main nor the backup parachute had opened. He then contacted her husband, Jan, to deliver the bad news. Jan rushed to his wife's side while Tom returned to the club to relay the sad news of Elsa's death to the other members. When news of Elsa's death was revealed, Babs, feeling overwhelmed, fell to her knees and cried bitterly. Elsa's husband, Jan, arrived at the club to collect her belongings and met Babs, who offered to help him retrieve Elsa's belongings. He observed her seemingly motionless and noticed a strange smile on her face. At that moment, Babs headed toward the dressing room, with Jan following closely behind. However, upon arriving, Babs abruptly slammed the door, locking Jan out. He recounted that it took Babs quite a while before she finally emerged with Elsa's belongings. Meanwhile, at the scene of the accident, police recovered Elsa's parachute and helmet, which was equipped with a video camera that recorded her fateful jump. An autopsy conducted to determine her condition but found no traces of alcohol or drugs that could have impaired her functioning. Her death was classified as either homicide or suicide, believed to have been caused by multiple fractures and internal bleeding from the impact of the fall. Elsa's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her paragliding club who knew how parachutes worked. After the police revealed that Els had been having an affair with Marcel Summers for more than 5 years, the family's grief intensified. Jan was particularly hurt when he learned that other club members, some of whom he considered friends, also knew about the relationship. Additionally, Els had provided false information to her club friends, claiming that she was divorced from her husband. Her funeral took place just 1 day before her daughter Carol's 15th birthday. During the solemn ceremony, Carol was moved to share a heartfelt message. She recalled the family's constant advice to her mother to stop parachuting. Through her story, Carol clearly expressed how much her family missed her mother. She ended her speech by acknowledging her mother's desire for privacy and emphasizing that she would not have been happy to give up her hobby. After the funeral, the police launched an investigation due to growing concerns about the failure of Elsa's backup parachute. A parachuting expert familiar with parachute mechanics was called in to examine Elsa's parachute for any flaws or irregularities. The experts quickly discovered that a crucial component was missing: the pilot's parachute, a vital part of the system. The pilot's parachute plays a key role in deploying both the main and backup parachutes. The examination revealed that her parachute had been deliberately detached, suggesting outside interference. In addition, there were clear signs of tampering, notably with the main parachute, which the pilot was responsible for deploying, and one of the slings connected to the emergency parachute. When reviewing the final body camera footage of Elsa's jump, a striking detail emerged: an unidentified piece of red fabric hovering in front of her that was not part of Elsa's parachute equipment. Investigators are having trouble determining the origin of the red object, so they asked residents of UPAB to thoroughly check their gardens and the surrounding area. If they find the object, investigators advise them to handle it with care, as it may contain DNA from the person who sabotaged Elsa's parachute. Unfortunately, people were unable to locate this important piece of evidence. After Elsa's tragic death, an unexpected event occurred on Monday. Babs found the pilot's parachute. Babs reported that she discovered the parachute when returning from Marcel's apartment and that it had been stuck in a tree along the path between UPAB and Genk. Rather than contacting the police directly, Babs chose to inform Marcel of her discovery. Upon hearing this, Marcel called the police, who quickly arrived at the scene. When the police arrived, they found Babs anxious, confused, and clearly affected by the incident. However, they were skeptical of her story when she claimed that she had discovered the parachute by accident. She explained that it was a complete coincidence and that she had simply decided to take a different route home that day instead of her usual path. According to her account, while stuck behind a slow-moving tractor, she looked up and saw a parachute hovering about 20 meters above the ground, which made her think it might be a sign from the heavens from Els. However, the police were doubtful of this story, as only the investigators knew that the parachute was missing at the time. Meanwhile, the main suspects in Elsa's murder included her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. The police searched Marcel's house and concluded that he was not a suspect. They also ruled out Elsa's husband from the list of suspects. Next, the police expanded their investigation to Babs's house, where they seized many items, including Elsa's phone, laptop, and personal diary. These diaries had been recommended by a psychiatrist for Els to record her feelings. Babs was then asked to come to the police station for questioning to gather more information about her relationship with Marcel and Els, as well as to clarify the events leading up to Elsa's death. During questioning, Babs firmly denied any involvement in the destruction of Elsa's belongings. Instead, she attempted to blame Marcel, claiming that he had kept Elsa's belongings while she was at their home the previous weekend. She also accused Jan of keeping Elsa's belongings during the week. After the questioning, Babs was really asked and allowed to return home. However, a second questioning was scheduled for December 20, 2006, but Babs did not show up. Subsequent investigations revealed that she had attempted to end her own life early that morning. After taking an overdose of sleeping pills and antidepressants, she became unresponsive. Her mother rushed her to the hospital for emergency treatment. In letters written before the act, she shared with loved ones the pain of losing her best friend and the overwhelming stress of being considered the prime suspect in the murder. Babs was then admitted to a psychiatric facility for observation and treatment for 15 days. Having long been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression, this was not the first time she had attempted to harm herself. Marcel believed she was merely trying to get attention and had severed ties with her. He thought her self-harm was a ploy to distract from her role in Elsa's death, rather than a genuine desire to end her life. Elle suspected she had taken medication just before her mother returned home to create a dramatic situation. He believed the police were closing in on her and that they would arrest her once they uncovered her lies. At that time, while she was receiving psychiatric treatment, Babs was arrested on January 11, 2007, on suspicion of murder. On January 19, 2007, she appeared in court and was subsequently remanded in custody while the investigation was ongoing. Babs refused to take a polygraph test despite being asked to do so. Further investigation into Els van Doren's parachute equipment revealed that the parachute cord had been deliberately cut with scissors. Based on the cut marks, it was determined that the person who cut the parachute cord was probably right-handed. By March 2007, Babs had been detained for 3 months and had undergone extensive interrogation. Despite the intense pressure, she refused to admit her guilt. During the interrogation, Babs confessed to sending an anonymous letter to Els, in which she acknowledged that her actions towards Elsa's family were wrong. However, this letter was misunderstood by Jan, who thought it was merely a criticism of Elsa's frequent absences due to her passion for parachuting. He discarded the letter without taking it seriously, but it was actually a warning that Babs intended to send to Els to end her relationship with Marcel. Additionally, Babs admitted to calling Marcel anonymously at a time when he was with Els, intending to intimidate them both. Investigators closely examined Babs's automatic activation device. Upon examination, they noticed that she jumped later than the other members of the group. However, her parachute activated earlier, allowing her to observe the events that followed from above. This strategic move also enabled her to locate Elsa's parachute, which she could retrieve later. In September 2008, Babs's lawyer successfully secured her bail, and although the case was still under investigation, she continued to work at the school. Babs's murder trial began on September 24, 2010. During the trial, the prosecution expressed confidence in the evidence they had gathered and believed there was sufficient evidence to charge her with murder. The defense argued that the murder was motivated by Babs's jealousy over her lover's relationship with her best friend. Babs had previously confessed to investigators that she knew she was second to Els in Marcel's eyes. She admitted that Marcel liked Els more than he liked her, which made her feel inferior. The prosecution suggested that her desire to eliminate her rival and remove Els from the relationship provided a plausible motive for the murder. Babs's defense attorney argued that the prosecution based their case only on circumstantial evidence and unproven claims. In her testimony, Clarence stated that she did not see a future with Marcel and that her intimacy with him was a result of her low self-esteem. She also tried to imply that Carol, Elsa's doll, Gaida might have wanted to get back at her mother for being absent most weekends. Despite her sincere efforts to persuade the jury and shift blame, the jury's verdict remained the same. On October 20, 2010, Babs, whose real name was Els Klotmans, was convicted of murdering her friend, Els van Doren, and sentenced to 30 years in prison. She later appealed, arguing that the police had questioned her without her lawyer present. In May 2011, her appeal was denied. However, in June 2022, after a third appeal and serving 12 years and 6 months, Els Clarence was granted conditional release from prison and is now free. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Avila. Michelle Yvette Avila, people often call her Missy, was born on February 8, 1968, and grew up in Arleta, Los Angeles, with her mother and 3 brothers. She attended San Fernando High School, where she met her 2 best friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. Michelle and Karen's close relationship began in childhood, but the two grew distant during high school. Michelle was known for her beauty and impressive long hair, which made her popular and well-liked among her peer group. Karen and Laura began to feel jealous because Michelle received a great deal of attention from others, especially boys. During Michelle's sophomore year, a rumor began to spread that she had relationships with many boys, all of whom had their own girlfriends. This rumor angered a group of girls who confronted Michelle outside the school. They brutally attacked her when she returned home. As a result of this brutal act, her attackers were brought to justice. The leader of the group was reported to be Sonia Bon. Michelle's parents immediately reported the ringleader of the attack. Michelle was scheduled to testify in court on October 8, 1985, but unfortunately, she never made it to court. In early September, Michelle had an argument with Karen and Laura, two of her close friends. The conflict arose from a rumor that had been circulating for over a year, accusing Michelle of having an affair with the boyfriend of one of them. Michelle then began dating a man named Randy at the start of her junior year, but their relationship lasted only about a month before she decided to end it. The reason for the breakup was Randy's constant partying, which Michelle could no longer tolerate. However, after breaking up with Michelle, Randy began dating Karen, and the two even moved in together after just a month. Despite this, Randy seemed to still have feelings for Michelle, as he frequently flirted with her, which made Karen unhappy. Michelle rejected Randy and informed him that she did not want to rekindle their relationship. Wanting to help Karen, Michelle advised her to consider ending her relationship with Randy and finding a better boyfriend. However, this advice angered Karen. As a result, Karen and Laura started spreading rumors again and decided to confront Michelle at a local park. During the confrontation, Michelle tried to appease Karen and Laura, reminding them that a similar situation had occurred the previous year and that she would never deliberately hurt them. Karen had argued with Michelle 10 days before she was murdered. During that argument, Karen yelled at Michelle, threatened her with a broken beer bottle, and pushed her to the ground before leaving with Laura. However, Laura later apologized to Michelle, and the two set aside their differences to continue their friendship. Karen did not contact Michelle for a while, but on October 1st, she sincerely apologized for her earlier behavior. This meant a lot to Michelle because she missed her friends, so the three of them decided to meet up at Stonehurst Park later that day. On October 1st, 1985, Michelle told her mother that she planned to go out with her friends. After gaining her mother's approval, on the condition that she be home by 6 p.m., Michelle went outside to wait for Laura to pick her up. When Laura arrived, they drove around before deciding to stop at Stonehurst Park. After parking, they waited for Karen to arrive. A few minutes later, Karen pulled into the parking lot, with Eva, their other friend, in the passenger seat. That's when things got worse for Michelle. When Karen pulled into the parking lot, she stopped very close to Laura's car and began to get angry. She rolled down her window and started yelling at Laura, using vulgar and abusive language. Laura also rolled down her window and responded to Karen with equally harsh language. Michelle and Eva sat in silence, watching their friend DS argue heatedly. Michelle had no idea what they were arguing about. Suddenly, Karen backed up and sped out of the parking lot, with Laura following closely behind. For 45 minutes, they drove at a high pace north of the city and into the mountains. Karen and Laura were driving so furiously that Michelle and Eva had to beg them to calm down and stop. The two girls finally drove to a parking lot that led to a large forest. Laura and Karen got out of the car, and an argument broke out, which escalated into a physical fight. Michelle also got out of the car in an attempt to stop her friends. However, as Michelle left the car, Karen and Laura suddenly stopped fighting and turned towards her. They were so close to Michelle that she could neither get back into the car nor move away from it. Karen smiled at Michelle and said that she and Laura were not arguing and were not angry with each other, but instead, they were angry with her. They informed her that the whole drama was just a ruse to lure her into the woods so they could confront her and punish her. They yelled at Michelle, revealing that they were the ones who spread the rumor because they were convinced that she had slept with their boyfriends, and they would not let her get away with it. Michelle tried to plead and convince them, insisting that she would never do such a thing and that she had never had sex with anyone, but they refused to listen. When Michelle started to remain quiet, Karen and Laura grabbed her and pushed her down a path into the woods. Michelle was very small, only 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighing 95 pounds, while Karen was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds, and Laura was 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. Michelle was unable to defend herself against them. Then they repeatedly forced her to go further down the trail. Eva, on the other hand, stayed in the car the whole time the altercation occurred. Eventually, she got out of the car and started walking behind the group. Eva had not participated in any of the girls' actions in the woods, and she did not even know why they were taking Michelle in the first place. As the group left the parking area and headed deeper into the woods, Laura stopped and confronted Michelle, who was crying helplessly and fearfully. Laura punched Michelle in the face, and Karen immediately joined in the beating. In a matter of seconds, Michelle was beaten, punched, and stomped, lying motionless on the ground. When the group stopped, Laura took a knife and cut off chunks of Michelle's hair. They did this intentionally because they knew Michelle loved her long, beautiful hair. Karen wanted to join in the cutting but didn't have a knife, so she simply pulled at each strand of hair with her hands. Eva stood and watched everything unfold. After they finished cutting, they tied Michelle's hands behind her back and gagged her. Since they were about 10 feet away from a river, Laura walked down to the stream, looked directly at Michelle, splashed the W. a tear, and began teasing her, asking her to get into the water with her. When Michelle refused to budge, Karen grabbed Michelle and pulled her up, then pushed Michelle towards the river, causing her to fall down. With her hands tied behind her back, Michelle's face hit the ground, and she rolled into the river. Laura and Karen had held her body under 8 inches of water. When Michelle suddenly broke free from Karen's grasp and lifted her head above water, Eva heard her scream. After Michelle screamed, Karen grabbed her head and pushed her under the water. When the girls realized that Michelle was almost drowning, they let her go and ran to a large log, then brought it over and placed it on Michelle's head. Laura and Karen grabbed her and pulled her into the water, forcing Eva to run back down the trail to the cars. When she reached the parking lot, Eva realized that both cars were locked and they were too far away to call for help. She was forced to start walking back down the trail. After a while, she heard a terrifying scream. She stopped, returned to the car, and lay down on the ground in a fetal position, waiting for about an hour for the girls to return. Finally, she saw Laura and Karen, soaked and smiling happily. However, Michelle was not with them. After leaving the woods, they got into the car with Eva and headed home. For hours after the ordeal, Laura called Michelle's mother and asked to speak with her. When Michelle's mother, Irene Avila, said she thought her daughter was with Laura, Laura claimed she had dropped Michelle off with 3 boys in a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura stated that she returned to the spot where she had dropped Michelle off, but both Michelle and the 3 boys were gone. On October 4, 1985, Michelle's body was found face down in a stream in Big Tujunga Canyon in the Angeles National Forest. 3 days later, a group of hikers contacted the police. When the police arrived, they discovered that Michelle had drowned in water only 8 inches deep. Her waist-length hair had been cut off, and a 4-foot-long log was found on her body. Police also found cigarettes, beer, and men's overalls near the location where Michelle's body was discovered. Detectives investigated the case based on the girl's statements that Michelle had been traveling with 3 men in a blue Camaro before she disappeared. This would explain some of the random items found around the crime scene. However, this statement led detectives to be misled and to search for men who did not exist for 3 years. Additionally, Irene later stated that she did not suspect Karen or Laura of being involved in her daughter's death, as both attended Michelle's funeral, and Laura even sent the family a condolence card along with $20. Karen moved in with Michelle's family for an extended period, showing her support and sympathy for them. She did her best to help catch the killers. In reality, however, Karen wanted to keep a close eye on the investigation and tried to avoid investigators as much as possible. Karen even slept in Michelle's bed and shared dinner with her family on several occasions. However, Karen was one of the girls responsible for Michelle's death. Karen also appeared to be haunted by the murder, visiting Michelle's grave several times a week and decorating her room with pictures of Michelle and newspaper articles about the case. She often went to the creek where Michelle's body was found. Once, Karen told Irene that she had seen Michelle's ghost. Detectives had no leads on the case until 3 years later, on July 26, 1988, when Eva drove 45 minutes into the mountains and turned herself into the police, revealing the entire story. She explained the rumors that had been circulating, the discord that had occurred among them, all the anger and jealousy, as well as every detail of the murder that she knew. Eva mentioned that it took her so long to come forward because Karen and Laura had threatened her, warning her not to say a word about anything she had seen, for fear they would kill her. In March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The jury later stated that they did not believe the murder was premeditated and dismissed the first-degree murder charge. Karen Severson was released on December 9, 2011, after serving 21.5 years, and Laura Doyle was released in December 2012 after serving 22 years. Karen Severson attempted to profit from writing a memoir about the murder and her life in prison, but her book did not sell well. She also appeared to have reached an agreement to make a movie about the murder, but Avila's family sued her in 2015, seeking to take profits from the sale of the work. As a result, the state of California passed Michelle's Law, which requires organizations that support the publication of works by criminals to contact the families of victims regarding such works. Michelle's story has sparked discussions about the effects of bullying, the complexities of teen relationships. Community initiatives and support networks have emerged to provide resources and support to those affected by similar experiences. As we remember Michelle, we honor her memory by working to create a world where friendships are built on trust and compassion. Her legacy serves as a reminder that every individual deserves respect, kindness, and the opportunity to live a life free from harm. Ultimately, Michelle Yvette "Missy" Avila's legacy will be one of courage and optimism. Hopefully, her memory will inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those who have been betrayed, and work toward a future where understanding and empathy are prioritized. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. He grew up in a deeply religious family. As a student at Princeton High School, David was actively involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Bible Club, Chess Club, Science Club, and a cappella chorus. After graduating from high school, he attended Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he studied electrical engineering. Notably, David demonstrated exceptional skills in computer engineering, which eventually led him to secure employment at prominent defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Anna Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She was the oldest of 6 children to parents Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Her father was a preacher and her mother worked at Walmart and singing in their church choir. However, Louise's childhood was extremely painful. Her parents often argued, which resulted in them treating their 6 children very poorly. Louise, her younger sisters, and her mother were sexually abused as children by a family member, a traumatic experience. This dark family secret was hidden for years but was later revealed by Louise's younger sisters. Despite facing their own distress, Louise was protective by shielding her younger siblings from their abuser and comforting them during their parents' intense conflicts. Her younger sister Elizabeth described her as gentle, compassionate, and caring, always working to comfort them during this difficult time. When Louise was 15 years old, she met 22 years old David Turpin at church, and then they started dating each other. Since they feared Louise's parents might not approve, they decided to keep their relationship private. After her mother, Phyllis, found out about the relationship, she initially had concerns but eventually accepted David and Louise's bond. This was partly because David came from a Christian family and partly due to Louise's reassurances. However, they still keep this relationship a secret from Louise's father, Wayne, as they were aware that he might be very upset if he found out. 5 years after graduating from Princeton High School, 23 years old David visited the school where Louise was a student. He managed to convince the school staff to let him take Louise out of class. Louise willingly left with David, and they set off on a journey south to get married in secret. Their plan was to elope without telling anyone. When Louise's parents found out she was missing, they contacted the authorities. However, before the authorities can catch up with them, the couple had already reached Texas, where they intended to get married without anyone knowing. Surprisingly, David and Louise agreed to return to West Virginia without resistance. When they arrived, they thought that Wayne and Phyllis would be angry, but instead, they received a calm reaction. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter to be in a relationship with David, but he eventually understood that he couldn't separate two people in love. Wayne eventually gave in and consented to their marriage. The couple got married in a simple ceremony in Pearisburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis got divorced, and Wayne started working as the chief deputy assessor in Mercia County. After her marriage, Louise began to drift away from her family. Free from her parents' rules, she was happy to start her own independent life. In 1988, Louise and her family welcomed their first child, a daughter. 18 months later, in 1990, they had another child. When David got a job transfer with General Dynamics, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and settled in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's high-paying job, the Turpins enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. To show off their new wealth, Louise invited her family from West Virginia to visit. Since she grew up without much money, Louise wanted to share her new success with her family. David and Louise kindly paid for their family's travel and accommodation expenses during the visit. In 1991, the Turpin family had a son, bringing them more joy. However, the family struggled with significant debt by 1992, despite David's high income. Instead of cutting back on spending, they continue to live a lavish lifestyle and continue to have more children. In 1993, Louise got pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. Every year, Louise's family visited the Turpins, but they didn't know the Turpins were struggling financially. To keep up appearances, Louise took care of all expenses during her family's visits, hiding their financial problems. In 1994, the Turpin family's eldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary. Her greasy and messy hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene suggested that she was being neglected by her parents. As a result, her classmates teased her and made fun of her for being dirty. The following year, 1995, the Turpin family had one more son. In 1996, they took a family trip to visit Louise's relatives. At the time, the Turpins were struggling financially, but they didn't seem to worry about it and continued to spend a lot of money, taking their relatives out to expensive meals. In the summer of 1996, Elizabeth, Louise's sister, traveled with the Turpin family to their home in Fort Worth for the holidays. During the trip, the family stopped at a casino in Louisiana, where Louise and David left Elizabeth in charge of the children while they gambled. Louise asked Elizabeth to keep their activities a secret. However, Louise's gamble was in direct conflict with her Christian upbringing, which taught her that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gamble ended in losses, which led to a fierce argument between David and Louise. David believed Louise had a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial struggles. During her stay with the Turpin family, Elizabeth witnessed the family's disturbing dynamics firsthand. David and Louise showed little affection towards their children and controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. Simple tasks like using the restroom or eating required permission from David and Louise. Moreover, Elizabeth found David's behavior especially unsettling. He regularly entered the bathroom while she was showering, watching her and making her feeling discomfort and uncomfortable. The Turpin family's problems started to worsen in 1997. In May of that year, they had another child. However, in September, concerns about her oldest daughter's health began to emerge. She was dirty and showed signs of possible sexual abuse. As a result, she was taken to the principal's office to talk about her home life. Unfortunately, no action was taken to address her situation. The family had another child in 1998, increasing their number to 6. Despite David's high-paying job, the family fell deeply into debt due to their frequent gambling. This led to significant financial difficulties. In 1999, the eldest daughter stopped attending school, followed by the other children. The parents claimed they were homeschooling, but this was not true. The bank foreclosed on the family's Fort Worth home in 1998, forcing the Turpins to move to a less populated area in Rio Vista, Texas. However, the new house was kept in a disgusting state. The owners who moved in after the Turpins reported finding dirt stains and a foul smell, suggesting the presence of feces. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the family had their 7th child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family had 5 more children, bringing the total to 13. As time went on, the parents' neglect turned into physical abuse. They would hit, slap, choke, and whip their children for minor reasons such as using the bathroom without permission. Shockingly, the children were only allowed to bathe once a year. The children were also malnourished. David and Louise bought delicious food, but they know to let their children eat it. Instead, they made their kids watch as they left the food untouched, leaving the children to suffer from hunger. This was a heartbreaking and inhumane situation that would have a profound impact on the children's lives. The children were severely malnourished due to being fed cheap frozen meals, leading to stunted physical growth and pale complexions that made them appear younger than their actual age. Additionally, the lack of social interaction and emotional abuse significantly impacted their mental development. In 2004, the Turpin family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their previous home in Rio Vista. This decision was made because their old house had become uninhabitable due to the overwhelming amount of trash and dead rodents. In 2008, Louise had a conversation with her younger sister Teresa that left her stunned. Louise, 40, revealed that she and her husband David no longer attended church, a huge change from their family's strict Christian upbringing. Instead, David and Louise became interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that them was involved in swinging, which meant they had sex with other couples they met online. What's more, they would often leave their younger children at home with their older siblings while they met strangers online. It became clear that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David acting as her accomplice by providing transportation and waiting for her during the encounters. This big change in her sister, Louise, from a caring and responsible person to someone almost unrecognizable, was deeply disturbing to Teresa. Meanwhile, the Turpin family moved to Marietta and made frequent visits to Disneyland, where they took many happy photos in matching outfits. Louise sent these photos to her family, with whom she had limited contact through Skype, and kept the children isolated from them. The photos reassured Louise's family that the children seemed to be in good spirits, despite appearing underweight. David and Louise had a strong fascination with Disneyland, This is evident from that they have come here many times. And they have recorded these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the family relocated to Peru, California, about 20 miles north of Paris, previously mentioned as Marietta. By this point, the abuse and violence against the children had become to extreme levels. David and Louise restrained the children to their beds using ropes, and if they tried to escape, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children were forced to spend around 20 hours a day locked in their room, surrounded by a foul smell that filled the air. In 2015, the family had their 13th and final child. The family took a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, which was a stark contrast to the abuse the children suffered at home. One of their children, 17 years old, found the courage to escape through a window and call the police to report the abuse. During the 20-minute 911 call, the girl described the terrible living conditions and the many abuses she and her siblings endured. She had photographic evidence and waited for the police to arrive. When they got there, they found a malnourished girl who looked much younger than her age. The girl gave the police pictures of the inside of the house. The police discovered the dark secrets the family had kept hidden. When police officers entered the house, they were immediately hit with a strong, foul smell that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the overpowering odor, they continued their search and were shocked by what they found. 3 of the younger children were chained to their beds. The house was extremely dirty and filled with trash, and the children did not have access to basic necessities like bathrooms. The police quickly took the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center for care, while the older children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. On January 14, 2018, the authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, accusing them of child abuse and torture. 4 days later, the couple was formally charged with multiple crimes, including 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment, with these charges applied to both David and Louise equally. Also faced a separate charge for engaging in a lewd act with a minor under the age of 14. Notably, among the Turpin children, the 2-year-old was unique in showing no apparent signs of abuse or torture. The Turpin children suffered severe physical and emotional abuse. The parents physically harmed them, including throwing them down the stairs, which resulted in nerve damage. The children lacked basic knowledge about life, further highlights the neglect they suffered. Although the parents bought toys for them, they were not allowed to play with these toys. The children's sleep was also severely restricted. They had to stay awake late into the night, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge ordered David and Louise to have no direct contact with their children for 3 years. Any communication would have to be through their lawyers. A few months later, on June 21, 2018, the court decided there was enough evidence to put David and Louise on trial. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise changed their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of dependent adults, false imprisonment, and dangerous for children. In a surprising turn of events, the court proceedings brought about an emotional reunion between the parents and their children. According to the children's statements, they had forgiven their parents and still loved them. Each child expressed concern for their parents' well-being and shared that they were doing well in their new lives. David and Louise, overcome with emotion, apologized sincerely for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success and happiness. David and Louise was given a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, who is 53 years old, and David, who is 60 years old, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in the Turpin household shocked the community and left many questioning why it went undetected for so long.